The hive never slept. The sound of its breath was constant, the endless thunder of smelters, the hissing of coolant vents, the grinding of ore haulers crawling like metal worms through arteries of soot and iron. For most citizens of Hive Arcos, the noise was a lullaby. It was the measure of life itself. If the hive was silent, it was dying, and if the hive died, so did everyone within its walls. But in the sump levels, far below the light of the spires, silence was spreading. It began as a hush between coughs. No one noticed at first. Coughing was as common as hunger in the sump. The air there was thick with chemical haze, fungus, spores, and the black dust of centuries. Men and women spat blood into their rags and carried on until their lungs failed, and then their children took their place. The administratum called it sump fever, though the Medicae knew it by 100 other names: lung rot, black wheezing, vent cough, manufacturum, phlegm. None of them mattered. The treatment was always the same: work until you couldn't, then die where you stood. Yet this cough was different. Medic de Jor-El Han knew it the moment the first patient came into his ward. A gaunt woman, little more than bones wrapped in rags, brought in by her husband. Her eyes watered, her lips blistered. And yet, when Jor-El pressed his auspex against her chest, the readings defied him. Her lungs were rotting, the tissue collapsing like parchment soaked in acid, but her pulse was steady. Too steady. "How long has she been like this?" Jor-El asked. The husband only shook his head, eyes full of resignation. "Since yesterday. It isn't like the others. She says she feels no pain." That was the first warning sign. No pain. In Hive Arcos, pain was constant. It was the language of survival. A worker without pain was already half a corpse. Jor-El lanced the blister on her lips, expecting the usual stink of infection. Instead, a bead of fluid as clear as nectar rolled down her chin. It glistened under the lumen strips, catching the light like honey. When it touched the floor, a fly landed on it and did not die. Jor-El shivered. Flies did not survive here. The air scrubbers burned them to ash long before they reached this deep. And yet the insect hummed with lazy contentment, wings buzzing, softly, as if it had always belonged. The Medicae wrote the case in his log, marking it as sump fever variant 7 theta. He did not write the word he wanted to. That word was infection. By the next day, there were 3 more. 2 children and a miner with arms corded by years of labor. The miner's cough shook the ward walls, rattling the shelves of tinctures and blessed salves. When Jor-El checked his lungs with auspex, he found them hollowing into caverns. Yet the man smiled through every spasm. "Feels good to breathe." "Medicae," the miner rasped. "Feels like I'm lighter than air. Like the hive ain't sitting on my chest anymore." The children played in the corners of their cots, humming a tune Jor-El did not recognize. It was oddly harmonious, too structured to be nonsense. Every time they coughed, the rhythm of their little song shifted, as though the sickness itself was teaching them the next line. Jor-El burned the linens after their discharge, whispering the Emperor's prayers over the ash. Yet the humming followed him home that night, echoing in the air ducts of his hab cell. He told himself it was memory. He told himself the sump made all men hear voices in the pipes eventually. But when he pressed his ear to the metal, the pipes whispered back. Within a week, the ward overflowed. Dozens of patients with blistered skin, clear lesions, and steady, painless heartbeats. Their flesh sagged, their eyes grew milky, but they laughed through it all. They laughed while their teeth fell out. They laughed while their fingers split open and bled clear fluid that smelled faintly of sugar. The other Medicae refused to work. The ward, they said the infection was wrong, that it carried no natural pattern. Jor-El alone kept notes, transcribing every detail with the methodical dread of a man who knew he would one day be judged for them. Patients do not complain of pain. Instead, they report sensations of comfort, even joy. Tissue damage is severe, but vitals remain oddly stable. New symptom: spontaneous boils erupting on limbs, filled with fluid that attracts insects despite environmental controls. That night, Jor-El dreamed of a garden. It was not a place the Emperor had made. The sky there was swollen green, the ground slick with pus, the trees twisted into dripping monuments of rot. Flies swarmed in clouds that shaped themselves into words, and in the distance, a great shape sat upon a throne of rusted iron and bone, vast and round, its laughter shaking the earth. When Jor-El woke, his sheets were damp, though no water pipes had burst. On the floor beside his cot, a single fly crawled slowly toward his foot. By the end of the second week, the plague was undeniable. The administratum clerks called it an outbreak. The governor's officers called it a quarantine. The minister called it a test of faith. But Jor-El, who had seen the eyes of his patients glow faintly in the lumen light, called it something else in his private log. He called it worship. The infected no longer looked like patients. They looked like congregants. Their humming was no longer random, it was structured, layered, a choir building toward a hymn. Every cough was a verse, every lesion a prayer. They clutched each other's hands, smiled through their scabs, and whispered the same words when they thought no one listened. Grandfather loves us. On the 15th day, the first corpse reanimated. Jor-El had overseen the autopsy himself. The man had died of massive organ failure, his insides collapsing into jelly. Jor-El cut into the chest cavity, whispering the litany of cleansing, scalpel. Steady despite his disgust, the lungs deflated with a sigh. Clear bile poured across the table. Then the corpse sat up, its mouth split into a grin wider than bone should allow. From its belly, the skin tore open, releasing a tide of tiny creatures. Little more than fat, bloated infants with horns and claws, laughing in high-pitched glee as they scrambled across the tiles. Their skin glistened with slime. Their eyes burned with malicious joy. Nurglings.1 leaped onto Jor-El's shoulder, nuzzling against his cheek with sticky affection. The Medicae screamed and tore it away, crushing it beneath a boot. Its guts splattered like curdled milk, but the laughter did not stop. The others tumbled over each other, playing, giggling, clambering into the ducts. By the time the guards arrived, the corpse was gone. Only the laughter remained. From that day forward, the hive began to change. Flies infested hab blocks, despite purifiers working at full capacity. Pustules formed on metal walls, dripping honey-scented slime. Vox units carried faint echoes of coughing. Choirs even when turned off. The people of Hive Arcos whispered that death no longer hurt, and Jor-El Han, Medicae of the Sump, could no longer tell if he was treating the sick or tending to the faithful. They sealed the ward with chains that had been kissed by incense flame and inked with catechisms against corruption. Adeptus Arbites in black carapace set shock barriers that spat blue teeth along the corridor thresholds. An Administorum Sacristan painted triplicate sigils of warning over every lintel in trembling strokes of sanctified oil. Steel shutters came down with the clatter of finality. Vox pylons crackled. The lumen strips dimmed to a penitential dusk. No. One believed that chains would hold, not against a sickness that sang decay. Jor-El Hon signed the quarantine ledger with a hand that would not stop shaking. The autokeels skittered in a nervous staccato across forms stamped by 3 separate authorities: Administratun, Arbites, and Ministorum, none of whom would admit, yet, that the thing beyond their seals was not an illness but a congregation. Inside, beds had been pulled wheel to wheel in the old sum-triage bay. A week ago it had been a rusting manufacturing office where broken men came to collect injury chits. Now it was all white sheets and copper drip lines, and the ceaseless soft percussion of coughs blending into a choir. No groans, no pleading, laughter, sometimes, humming mostly, and between the hums, that impossible hush that made Jor-El feel as if the very air were waiting for a command. He began his round, patient, 7th-8-12, a boy with soot freckles and a scar along the jaw from a conveyor belt accident. Lesions lay across his ribs in symmetrical clusters, each cluster 3 raised boils forming a triangle. They glistened like lacquered coins. When Jor-El palpated them, the boy giggled through broken teeth. "Do they hurt?" Jor-El asked. "They tickle, Medicae," the boy said, eyes bright. "If I breathe just so, they tingle in time." "In time to what?" The boy nodded toward the vents, where a slow, wet draft coaxed a note from somewhere deep in the ductwork. The note slid into a second, then a third, becoming a chord too soft to be an accident. Patient 7th-8-19, a miner, the one who had said he felt lighter than air. His lesions had spread along the clavicles and the curve of the neck, drawn together in patterns that resembled garden trellises and spore flowers. The flesh between them had gone the color of tarnished brass. His breathing no longer rasped. It whistled, a breathy descant that someone across the room subconsciously matched in harmony. Jor-El adjusted the man's mask and watched his fingers come away sticky with clear serum that smelled faintly sweet as if sugar had been burned, just to the edge of smoke. He wiped the residue on a sterile pad, and the pad didn't stain. It soaked the fluid as if it were thirsty for it. Patient 7th-8-03, the gaunt woman with blistered lips. The blisters had ruptured and left behind little fans of new skin that layered like fungus gills. She smiled at him with unfocused tenderness. When the vents sighed, she mouthed words without sound. "Thank you. Thank you for your gift." He checked his auspex, lungs collapsing into architectural ruins. Heart rate steady as a metronome. Pain response negligible. Joy Indexi had no instrument for that. He set the auspex aside and wrote in his book, lesions forming ordered triads across chest, abdomen, back. Arrangement appears non-random. Serum remains clear. Attracts insects even with purifier stack at full dot. Patients exhibit analgesia and euphoric affect despite systemic failure. Multiple instances of involuntary harmonization with ward ventilation. He paused, pen hovering, then added, in the margin, where no clerk would ever read. The lesion triads resemble the old sum graffiti, 3 circles. I will not write the name. Jor-El closed the book and looked up in time to see Sister Medicae Salma step through the chain curtain with a sack of chirurge, tools and fresh bandages. Her mask hid the lower half of her face. Her eyes above it were red from sleeplessness. She made the sign of the Aquila to him with hands that shook as badly as his own. "You shouldn't be on this rotation," he said. "You've done 2 shifts." Brother Armax collapsed in decon, she said, voice flat. Vomited until he passed out. He's in bed 3. He's whistling in his sleep. Then you should leave and abandon them. She looked at the boy in bed 12, at the way he beat time on the railings with both palms in a child's careful rhythm. They're not afraid, Jor-El. No, he said. And that is the worst symptom. She flinched, then forced a hard nod and began her work, peeling back bandages, washing lesions with saline, reciting liturgies over each patient. Her lips moved, the prayers blurred by the mask. Jor-El joined her when he could, hands a choreography of gauze and clamps. When he could not help, he wrote. When he could no longer write, he listened. The vents sang again, somewhere an orderly matched the pitch, then to nurses, then 3 patients who should have been too weak to lift their heads. Jor-El felt the note in his teeth. The quarantine door clanged open. A pair of Arbeits entered, helms sealed, batons slung flame a trooper. At their back, between them strode Confessor Bolero of the Minister Umthin as a lash, skull-shaved, rosarius swinging against a breastplate filled with prayer scrolls. He smelled of incense and cold iron. Medicae hon, the confessor said, voice like the edge of a letter opener. I am told your ward defies metrics. I am told there is singing. There is, Jor-El said. There has been reanimation as well, one event, day 7. Reanimation, the confessor repeated, and his mouth tightened, either in disgust or in hunger for the fight. You have recorded all irregularities. Yes, you will take me to the worst case. Jor-El hesitated. The worst case was only 12 beds away and smiling with cracked lips. He gestured toward bed 20-7. Asterisk, the woman there had been a garment scrubber. Her hands still bore the chemical burns of that labor, though her skin had grown over them, in ropey knots that gleamed like varnish. Lesions bracketed her collarbones the threefold. Pattern, a ganond, a scatter of pustules across the sternum formed a lattice with an almost mathematical symmetry. When she breathed in, the pustules drew tight in unison, and when she exhaled, they widened in the same order every time. Left upper, right upper, central low. It was like watching an instrument played by a careful child. The confessor stood at the bedside and set a finger against the woman's brow. Do you know me? He asked. She blinked slowly. Yes, Father. Do you love the Emperor? Tears pooled at the corners of her eyes. Yes, Father. Do you confess the Emperor's divinity and the falsity of all other gods? She smiled. The smile was not blasphemy, it was gentleness. Grandfather loves us because the Emperor made us. Grandfather says we do not have to be afraid anymore. The confessor's rosarius clicked once against his armor. He drew in breath. To preach, the vent sighed. The woman's chest clicked and fluttered, and a note spilled out of her broken mouth, high, clean whistle that made Jor-El's scalp tighten. It wasn't beautiful, it was correct, it belonged. Confessor Bolaro's pupils flicked for a heartbeat. He looked like a man hearing a childhood hymn after too many years of war. Then he bared his teeth and slammed his hand down, pressing hard over the triad of boils until the woman winced. There is no grandfather, he said. There is rot, there is treachery, there is a garden full of lies. She only sighed and whispered, it smells like flowers. He stepped back as if scorched. To Jor-El, he said, too brisk, too loud, prepare your theatre. We will perform an autopsy in my presence. I will see the mechanism that teaches lungs to sing. The theatre was a boil-scarred cube 2 doors down, scrubbed so clean that the smell of antiseptic should have stung the eyes. It didn't. The thing that had moved into the ward had eaten harshness out of the air and left behind something sweet. That sweetness stuck to the back of Jor-El's throat like praise you didn't mean. They laid the cadaver on the steel and fastened restraints that would not be needed. Sister Salma cranked the old ventilation bellows with her elbow, forcing a steady draft across the table. The confessor stood at the head, Rosarius flaring. Faintly with each prayer he mouthed. "Record begins," Jor-El said, and the autokeel scratched. Subject 7th, 8031. Female, mid-30s, deceased 3 hours post-admission. Cause of death, systemic organ failure, dermal lesion proliferation, respiratory collapse without hypoxic distress. Commencing thoracic incision, he cut. The blade moved through skin that should have given way like rotten cloth. Instead, it slit with an obscene neatness, as if lines had been drawn beneath the flesh. When he pulled back the flaps, he saw the architecture inside. Alveoli stiffened into little pipes, bronchi, reinforced by translucent webbing like winding vines. Patches of tissue had thickened into nodules, the exact size and spacing of the lesions on the woman's chest, and each nodule contained 3 tiny cavities that shone with a greasy sheen. Sister Salma swallowed. "It's organized." "Apply low pressure," Jor-El said, and she worked the bellows. Air slid across the pipes. A cord formed. It was soft enough to deny in a report. Not soft enough to deny when it trembled the hair in Jor-El's ears. The cord was not random. It held for 2 heartbeats, then stepped upward by a precise interval, then down again, then separated into 2 lines like a teacher demonstrating harmony to a child. Salma's lips parted. The confessor's prayer faltered. Somewhere in the ductwork beyond the theater, the vents answered with the ghost of the same sound. Jor-El's hand jerked. The scalpel nicked one of the triple cavities. Clear fluid beaded and ran along the edge of the blade. It smelled like apple rot, like fruit left too long in a warm room. A fly came from nowhere and landed on the bead. Its wings hummed. The hum matched the chord. Confessor Bolaro flung his censer over the open chest. Smoke coiled and sank then, vanished, sucked into the pipes within the lungs, as if the incense had been a flavor the organ craved. "Enough," he said hoarsely. "Close it. Burn it. Burn it." Jor-El looked up. "This is data. We can understand it. Do you imagine you will quantify blasphemy?" The confessor's hand trembled on the chain of his rosaries. "Do you imagine numbers will hold back a god?" Sister Salma stared at the humming lungs and did not move. The confessor took 3 strides, seized the flamer's pilot tube from the Arbeitstrooper, thumbed the igniter. Liquid fire streamed into the open chest. The cord leaped. Split became a shriek that was almost laughter, then collapsed into silence as tissue blackened and curled. The smell of cooked sweetness hit Jor-El like a hand. "Seal this chamber," the confessor said, shaking. "Scrub it. Paint the walls with holy texts if you must. We will bring more priests. We will bring sisters if we can. And we will bring a vox to the governor and ask him if he prefers a ward that sings to devils or a ward that reads litanies while it dies." He left in a storm of ash and Latin. Jorl closed the cadaver with sutures that held even where they shouldn't. His gloves stuck to the edges. When he stripped them off, the fluid glistened on his skin for a second before soaking into his palms as if his flesh had wanted it. He scrubbed until his hands bled. The sweetness lingered. Quarantine meant nothing to a hive. News traveled through ductwork better than air. Within a day, the Arbites had ringed the corridor with riot shields and a portable autocannon. Within 2, the hablock outside filled with wives and husbands and children who had come not to weep but to wait. They pressed themselves to the barrier, eyes wet and shining, and implored the officers to let them in. "Please," a woman said, to Jor-El when he came up for breath. Her breath smoked in the chill of the passage. 3 boils sat in a neat triangle along her throat. "They'll be lonely without us. We breathe better together." "You can't," he said. "You'll carry it out. We should be so blessed." Behind her, men held their hands out through the fence for drops of serum that had spattered on the bars. One of them caught a bead with a fingertip and touched it to his tongue, then smiled as if he had remembered something important. An Arbite sergeant banged his baton along the fence and shouted for dispersal. The crowd hummed the note of the vent with one voice. The vent, obedient as an old instrument, hummed back. "Drive them off," the sergeant muttered to his second. "I want a clear corridor." "Sir," the second said, not moving. His voice sounded distant to himself. "Sir, it's not hurting anyone." "It will," Jor-El said sharply, and the second blinked and shook himself as if waking from a nap. The sergeant looked at Jor-El through his visor. "Medicae, you will advise the governor that we cannot hold this line without authorization. To use lethal measures. Lethal measures will spread it faster," Jor-El said, before he could stop himself. "Blood carries. Wounds open doors." He heard his own voice and hated its certainty. "Containment, tight filters. Burn what you must, but do not." He saw the triad of boils along the sergeant's jaw, beneath the edge of the helm. "Do not let them sing to you," he finished softly. The sergeant jerked his head away as if struck and marched down the line barking orders. His men obeyed. Their batons trembled against the bars. Jor-El turned back to the ward. Sister Salma coughed into the crook of her elbow as she tightened a drip line. When she drew her arm back, 3 dots of clear fluid gleamed on her sleeve. She stared at them, the way a pilgrim might stare at a relic. "You're going to Decone," Jor-El said. "I'm needed here." "You are needed alive." "I am alive." She smiled without humor. "More alive than I felt last week." He heard it then, in her breath, a faint high whistle, barely more than a draft across a bottle's mouth. He reached for the auspex. She took a step back. "Don't," she said. "If you name it, it becomes a case." "Salma," he said. She set her jaw and pulled a mask back over her face. "We still have work." They did. The work had changed. Bandaging became an anointing. Saline became a libation. They replaced the words of the litany of cleansing with the litany of comfort because the first seemed to roll off the walls and fall at their feet, while the second rose like breath and came back to them as echo. A child's fever broke not, with ice packs, but when his mother was smuggled under the chain and allowed to lay beside him and breathe into his mouth, the 2 of them harmonized perfectly. The servo-medicae trundled their syringe forearms from bed to bed. Their machine spirits, bribed with incense and data prayers, should have run their routines without deviation. Jor-El watched one of them pause beside a man whose chest hummed in fourths, then adjust its own pump valves to match the rhythm. Its brasswork clicked more smoothly after that. It began to purr in the corner. The ministorum had erected a little altar from a gurney draped in a blood-scrubbed sheet. A Pict of the Emperor looked down with tired majesty, and someone had placed 3 globes of glass beneath it without thinking. The glass caught the lumen and made 3 cold suns along the edge of the altar cloth. Jor-El moved them, heart stumbling. And within an hour they were back again, though he never saw who moved them. A priest came near nightfall, not Confessor Bolero, but a younger man with raw hands and the quick, eager eyes of one not yet promoted to a pulpit. He stood at the foot of bed 27 and opened his mouth to preach the old comfort. Pain has meaning. Suffering refines. Endurance is devotion. The woman on the bed lifted one trembling hand, touched his sleeve with delicate fingers, and said, "We already believe. We just stopped being afraid." He closed his book slowly. After a long moment, he began to read from the Psalms of Mercy instead, voice losing its cadence and falling into a hush that harmonized with the vents. When he reached the part about the emperor cradling the lowly in his golden hands, 3 flies landed on the page and sat there like punctuation. He didn't brush them away. Jor-El did not sleep. He wrote, "Autopsy confirms restructured pulmonary architecture capable of resonant tones when air flows. Tissue cops incense smoke. Serum continues to override antiseptic and is absorbed by porous substrates, non-infected. Staff demonstrating mirroring behavior, breathing patterns, humming, quarantine perimeter compromised by voluntary exposure, attempts. Confessor Bolero recommends burning rather than study." He set the quill aside. The little glass inkwell had been empty an hour ago. It was full again. He turned it in his fingers and saw, beneath the black, a trace of clear fluid clinging to the walls. He whispered a blessing over the book, without meaning it, and went back to the beds. In the far corner, a cluster of children had pulled their blankets together into a single heap. They slept stacked like kittens, their little chests rising and falling in a shared rhythm that made the blanket ripple. A Nurgling peered out from the fold-green skin, lambent, eyes bright with greedy happiness and blue, a wet raspberry. Jor-El hissed and reached for a clamp. The creature rolled into the blankets and disappeared with a delighted squeal. The children smiled in their sleep. He dragged the blankets aside and found nothing but warm sheets and the sweet smell of milk gone wrong. "I saw it," Sister Salma whispered behind him. "So did I," he said. She looked at him for a long time, then nodded and tucked the children back in. One stirred and murmured, "Grandfather," and put a sticky hand on Salma's wrist. She did not pull away. The Arbites made a show of force at dawn. Flamer teams swept the corridor. Purifiers howled. Soot roiled past the chain curtains like storm surf. The ward fell silent as the hive outside roared. When the noise faded, footsteps approached. Confessor Bolero returned with 2 more priests in tow and a data slate full of orders. He set it on the little altar and did not look at the 3 glass globes. Someone had placed there again. "By command of the governor," he announced, voice steady because it had a scaffold of law to stand on. "All persons within this ward are confined until further notice. Decon will be conducted hourly. The faithful will pray. The faithless will keep silent. The Emperor will hear either way." "Do you have sisters?" Jor-El asked. "They are on the Vox," Bolero said. A muscle jumped in his cheek, as are others. "Others, do your work, Medbouquet." Bolero moved bed to bed, blessing foreheads. With oil, his fingers left 3 pale dots on each brow. The oil dried and darkened into little coins. When he realized what he was doing, he hissed and wiped his hand on his robe as if he had found a spider there. Then he doubled his prayers and went on. Sister Salma coughed, low and careful and apologetic, as if she had broken a glass. The note of it tangled with the vent's cord and made a harmony so right that Jor-El had to close his eyes not to weep. He wept anyway. Near midnight, the lights flickered and steadied and flickered again. The vox crackled with static that shaped itself into a gentle chuckle. The vents inhaled. Every lesion in the room tightened, then loosened in a grand, slow wave. The ward breathed as one lung. In the pause that followed, Jor-El heard the hive above them, the thunder of smelters, the chug of ore haulers, the moan of ancient girders, all of it caught for one heartbeat in the gravity of a single, soft, wet sound. A bell dot, not metal, not machine. Something inside the walls had found a tone and leaned on it. The tone rolled down the corridor and out into the hab and further, pulled along ducts and ducts until it reached places where the arbits could not go and the ministorum would not. Jor-El felt it in his sternum the way you feel a lover's sigh. Through your ribs, the patients exhaled all together. The notes settled in their chests like a promise. Sister Salma's hand found his. He didn't know when she had moved to his side. Her palm was warm. It left a little smear of clear fluid against his skin, and he did not pull away. "We're losing," she said. "We were told we would lose a long time ago," he said. His voice broke into a laugh that wasn't joy. "We were not told it would feel like this." Like what? Like relief. He turned his hand and saw, along the soft flesh beneath his thumb, 3 pale dots blooming where her touch had been. For a moment, he imagined how easy it would be. He imagined taking one deep breath, matching the ward, letting his lungs learn the chord, letting his bones and blood arrange themselves into something that didn't fear the next cough or the next shift whistle, or the next year of the hive's endless long day. He imagined Sister Salma's tired eyes, clear with a happiness that didn't need justification. Then he imagined the garden, and the flies, and the throne of rust, and the laughter that had not been laughter, and he closed his fist until the 3 dots smeared. He found his book, Medicalog 7 Theta. Day 11 ward behavior synchronizes with ventilation cycle at irregular intervals. Global entrainment event at 23:58. Confessor Bolero increasing sacramental presence. Blessings inadvertently echo triadic. Mark. Staff. Contamination Sister Medicae. Salma probably. Arbeit Sergeant. Visible lesions. Recommendation. Full isolation. No outside visitors. Suspension of non-essential Vox traffic. Petition for orbit-side assistance. He stopped there. He didn't write the last word he wanted to, exterminatus. He wasn't a man who made such recommendations. He was a man who had learned to hold a child's hand while it burned with fever, and to smile while he lied that medicine would work. The vents breathed in, the ward breathed out. Someone, on the other side of the chain curtain, began to hum the bell note very softly, as if to a child in a cradle. Jor-El set the pen down and pressed his palms together until the fluid there slicked and warmed. He whispered a prayer to the Emperor that tasted like apples left too long on a sill. And then he lit another stick of incense and watched the smoke go where it wanted. The chains on the quarantine door did not move. They didn't have to. The singing could pass through anything that left a gap for air, and the air belonged to grandfather. The Arbites broke the quarantine at dawn. It was not disobedience, not at first. It was procedure. Governor's decree: suppress civil unrest, maintain order, preserve production. The Arbites interpreted unrest as the crowd swelling around the sealed ward. The people pressed against the fences and chain curtains, pleading, singing, humming the notes they'd heard echo from the vents. Some of them bore lesions already, little constellations along throat and chest, but most were clean and desperate. Medicae, Jorl Han. watched from the ward's inner shutters as the black-armored enforcers formed a line. Riot shields locked, batons charged, helm lenses blank as insect eyes. Their voxcasters barked dispersal warnings in binary and high Gothic. The crowd did not move. They swayed, and the sway had rhythm. Disperse in the name of the Lex Imperialis. The answer was a cough. One cough, then a dozen, then a rolling thunder of lungs in sequence, until the whole Hablock thundered like a drum. Jor-El knew it wasn't rebellion. It was contagion using flesh as choir. The Arbites did not. The sergeant gave the order. Shock batons swung, shields shoved. The crowd should have broken, should have scattered like rats before floodwater. Instead, they surged forward, faces alight with something between rapture and defiance. Hands reached for the Arbite's armor, not to tear, not to strike, but to touch, to bless, to share. The first Arbite's officer screamed when 3 boils erupted along the seam of his gauntlet. The second fell when a woman kissed his visor and left a smear of clear fluid that glowed faintly green. The third raised his flamer and never pulled the trigger, because the nozzle had filled with buzzing flies. The line collapsed in seconds. From the ward, Jor-El heard it. Laughter, deep and wet, echoing down ducts and pipes, threading itself through vox grills until the hive itself seemed to chuckle. Inside the ward, panic fractured discipline. Sister Salma clutched a child to her breast as the quarantine chains rattled. The boy was humming into her collarbone. She hummed back without realizing it. Confessor Bolero stood in the center aisle. Rosarius' raised voice raw from shouting litanies. His words were fire and steel, but the cadence of his prayers faltered each time the vents answered him with harmony. Sweat poured down his shaved scalp. His fingers never left the trigger of the hand flamer holstered at his side. Jor-El forced himself to move cat to cat, checking vitals he already knew. Stable, always stable. Too stable, hearts like metronomes, lungs like instruments. These were not patients anymore. They were vessels. The chains burst. The Hab crowd flooded in, carrying with them the stink of sweat and oil, overlaid with something sweeter. They didn't storm. They didn't trample. They walked reverently, touching beds, pressing their foreheads to patients, singing low and soft. A family reunited, an army of plagueist pilgrims, a tide of worshippers in the guise of citizens. The Arbits followed, but their formation was gone. Half had stripped helmets away. Some were already kneeling, cradling the sick as if they were saints. One officer tore pages from his codex of law and fed them to the nearest brazier, watching the flames consume them with tears of ecstasy. Only a handful kept batons high, beating at shadows they could no longer distinguish from their own thoughts. Jor-El saw the sergeant among them, visor cracked, jaw slick with serum from lesions spreading like medals across his throat. He raised his weapon, voice breaking as he tried to give one last order. It came out as a hymn. Confessor Bolero drew his flamer and bathed the aisle in fire. The crowd screamed, but their screams carried no fear. They carried joy. Men and women burned alive on the ward floor, hands outstretched, and their mouths still sang through melting lips. The flames guttered and hissed where serum slicked the tiles, turning the smoke sweet as candied fruit. The confessor coughed, eyes watering. Back, he roared. Back, in his name. But no one moved back. Not the crowd, not the patients, not even Sister Salma, who stood cradling her boy while fire painted the walls. She looked at Jor-El with wide, tear-bright eyes, and in her gaze was neither fear nor denial. It was relief. "They're not afraid anymore," she whispered. "Isn't that what faith is supposed to be?" Jor-El seized her arm. "To me, it's not salvation, it's corruption. It smiles while it kills." But as he said it, his words faltered, because the boy in her arms coughed again, and from his throat came not blood, not bile, but a note so pure it made Jor-El's bones ache with memory. A lullaby his mother had hummed when he was a child, one floor above the sump, before the hive. Swallowed her lungs. He staggered back. His knees hit the gurney. The vents breathed. The walls pulsed. The hymn swelled. The confessor fired until his tank ran dry. The Arbites fired until their ammo clicked empty. The crowd pressed forward regardless, singing, smiling, touching, sharing dot, and when the last flames sputtered out, when the last shot echoed away, silence fell, for one heartbeat, then every throat, patient and pilgrim, Arbites and Medicae alike, exhaled together. The ward became one lung, and Hive Arcos shuddered with its breath. After the ward breathed as one, the Hive answered. The ducts thrummed with returning echoes. The floor plates carried a faint vibration, as if something enormous had turned in its sleep somewhere below, shifting old girders against older stone. Every lumen buzzed a half-tone off, true, and stayed there, refusing to correct, as if the light itself preferred the wrong note. Medicae Joralhan wiped the sweetness from his mouth and tasted it again anyway. The chains over the quarantine door still hung, links scorched from the confessor's last purge, but no one had touched them. They did not matter. Air passed around them as water goes around a rock. The song cared only for gaps, and a hive is built from nothing but gaps held apart by metal. He forced himself back into motion. He tightened straps. He checked pupils. He cleaned instruments that would not stay clean. He spoke the words of comfort. A Medicae learns the way a priest learns Latin. His voice came back from the ceiling with a second voice braided through it. He didn't listen to the braid. Sister Salma worked opposite him, sleeve damp, mask crooked, eyes fever bright. The child at her hip had fallen asleep. His tiny chest rose and fell against her with a tempo that matched the breaths of the whole room. She swayed without knowing it. The 3 faint dots along the soft of her wrist were no longer faint. Confessor Bolero stood where the aisle became altar. His rosarius clicked like teeth. His flamer canister lay empty at his feet, a brass shell cooling, sweating. He had been a man of iron posture and sharpened pronouncements when he arrived. He was still straight now, the way a spear driven into a corpse is straight. His lips moved. His prayers had worn themselves into a groove. No fear, no compromise, no contagion of the soul. The vents waited for him to finish each line and answered with their own. Boots thudded outside in the corridor. A new sound, not the syncopated tramp of Arbites, but the steady, sensibly cruel rhythm of PDF soldiery going where they had been told. Carbines, tanks creaking, voxes whispering in clipped cant. The chains rattled, gentle as cutlery, positions. Bolero snapped, too loud, because loudness keeps doubt from finishing its next step. Masks tight. No one answers if the outer detail demands entry. They may already be. He glanced at the door and swallowed the last word. Already blessed. The chains did not break. A chime sounded instead, polite and absurd, as if a habwife had brought tea. The voice that followed through the speaker was clipped, educated, tired. This is Lieutenant Caldor, 9th Arcos PDF. Medicae Hon, Confessor Bolero. You will open at once. Orders from the governor. Bolero moved as if to answer, then checked himself. He drew Jarell aside into the narrow space behind a bank of dripper lines. "We will not open," he hissed. "They will want bodies. They will take them into corridors we do not control. They will spread what is here into places it has not yet claimed. They will come through anyway, Father." Jorel kept his voice low. "And if they burn the door, they'll burn the ward." "Then we hold them in the threshold," Bolero said, eyes hard and bright. "We speak, and we do not inhale." The chime again, a different voice over the same vox, nasal with Medicae acknowledged receipt of gubernatorial decree. Curfew across manufacturum 6 to 12. Level sum 3. Civil assemblies forbidden. Quarantine Theta ward to be remanded to PDF custody for triage and processing. Medicae personnel to assist. Processing, Sister Salma whispered. The word did not mean medicine in a hive. It meant counts. It meant cuts. Jorel, he squeezed her arm. Masks on. He stepped to the chains and thumbed the little brass speak switch. "This is Medicae Han," he said. He heard the wards. Harmonics climbed to meet his name, and he chose not to hear them. "We will not open. You are already contaminated." A pause. A murmur on the line. The lieutenant returned, voice wrapped tight around his breath. "Medicae, I have 40 troopers and a Prometheum team. I have authorization for lethal force and for flame. I have orders to relocate your patients to a processing bay where they can be cared for." The hesitation had been only 2 breaths, but Jorel heard it. It had a shape. Care, cut. He looked back down the aisle, the rows of bodies that were no longer merely bodies. The way the 3-fold lesions on their chests tightened in the same order now left. Right, center as if lungs were rosaries. He looked at Salma's eyes. He looked at the confessor's knuckles white against the rosarius. Jorel pressed the switch, "Lieutenant. If you flood this room with flame, you will make steam. The steam will carry what is in here into your filters. Your men will inhale. They will sing while they burn. We have seen it." Silence. Then a laugh on the line. That wasn't a laugh. Somewhere behind the lieutenant, a trooper coughed once, precisely on the vent's pitch. "We are coming in," Kaldor said. "Stand clear." Bolero lifted the flamer out of reflex and found only weight. He grimaced. "Then we hold the threshold," he murmured again, and kissed the little Aquila stitched to his sleeve. A man kissing a coin before a gamble. The breaching charge took the chains like a handwriting teacher correcting a child. The door stuttered open. The threshold filled with men in grand, black visors down, respirators chuffing, heavy stubbers leveled. Behind them, a Prometheum crew in grease-stained robes handled their hoses like organists at a grim instrument. The first trooper stumbled a half-step, as if the floor had risen to meet his boot. He steadied. He would have seemed unreadable behind the mask, except his beard had grown long enough to spill below the filter canister and on the shaven throat. Above it, Jarell saw 3 swollen dots shadowed by the edge of the gorget. "Hold your line," Kaldor said. He had no lesions that Jorel could see. His voice sounded like a man saving his for later. "Medicate, point out the worst cases first. We will relocate them for mercy, no." Bolero's voice rang with true steel for the first time. "That day you remove no one. You burn no one. You stand your men to either side and you pray. Father, with respect, you came to do a soldier's work in a place where the battlefield is breath. Holster your courage. You are not built for this fight." Jarell thought the lieutenant might strike the priest. Instead, Kaldor's head turned to degrees. listening to a voice only he could hear. He flinched, a tiny movement, and his shoulders, loosened in defeat, he disguised as prudence. "Prometheum, on standby," he said into his throat mic. "No discharge without my order. Medicae, masks on all your people." "Now, my people," Jor-El said. The lieutenant looked past him, down the aisle where the ward breathed. "Anyone who still intends to live." They tried to be orderly. Order is a habit drilled so deeply into a hive that it continues for 3 days past collapse. The PDF split their line, troopers forming a narrow corridor through which gurneys could roll. They moved with that professional clumsiness common to men who have learned to carry weight in death halls without scuffing holy paint. The Prometheum team took position in the door like a cork. 2 Arbit stragglers drifted in under the PDF's shadow, helmets off, faces pink and raw where respirators had rubbed skin raw. One had a smear of clear fluid drying along his cheek like a tear. He smiled at no one in particular. Jor-El and Salma strapped patients in. They had been told to tag the worst. They didn't. They picked those whose eyes still darted when you said their names. The ones who might yet run rather than kneel. The ones the song had not entirely married. "Where will you take them?" Jor-El asked without looking up, as if the answer might be less true if he never put his eyes on it. "Processing Bay 4, Kaldor said. "Compartmentalization, decon. Incinerators on standby." "On standby," Jor-El repeated softly, like Prometheum. Kaldor said nothing. They rolled the first gurneys into the corridor of guns. The troopers looked nowhere. The flies knew exactly where to land: knuckles, visor rims, barrel jackets. A Nurgling Emperor preserved them. It had wedged itself in the lid track of a servitor. Case popped its head out, burped a bubble of slime, and giggled. A private flinched and laughed back. A quick hiccup he smothered under a cough. The vents inhaled. The entire corridor exhaled. Jor-El felt the tide in his bones. Each breath made the lesion triads tighten across 20 chests at once. The gurneys rolled to the rhythm. "Keep moving," Kaldor said. "If we stop, they sing." They did not stop. They made it 8 gurneys, then 9. On the 10th, the song found them. It came from behind the PDF line, not in front of it, from the hab. 100 throats, perhaps more, not chanting, not shouting, just a long, contented note. The sound a child makes when the nightmare turns its face away. It flowed around the soldiers' ears and their filters and into their ribs. The trooper, on the right end of the corridor, lowered his weapon. Without looking away from the patient he guarded, he reached his free hand back and unclipped his mask. "Trooper," Kaldor snapped. The man took one breath. He let it out with his eyes closed. Tears brightened the lines beside his nose. Then 3 boils flowered along his cheek like medals granted for the sin of exhaling. Kaldor swore and struck the mask back into place with the heel of his hand. The trooper laughed once, softly, and returned to his posture. "Seal that hatch." Kaldor barked to the Prometheum crew. "Close off the hab side." Now, they hauled the heavy blast leaf down. It thumped home and made a little disappointed sigh as it settled. The song lowered in volume, but it did not fade. The walls learned sound quickly. Lieutenant Jor-El said, "Violence spreads it. Fire makes steam, shot makes spume. Blood is a choir when you beat it into air. We need silence. We need to stop breathing." Kaldor's laugh was a rag of cloth torn by tired hands. "Medicae, the hive is a lung. What do you prescribe when the organ is the city?" A gurney wheel squealed. Jor-El looked down, grateful for anything he was allowed to fix. The Axel had picked up a strip of bandage. He crouched to clear it, and when he lifted his head, the corridor was full of new figures shuffling out of the far door in a loose, unlovely file. They wore no masks. They needed none. Their skins were parchment stretched over swelling humours, their mouths slack, their eyes bright and stupid and blissful. Lesion triads bristled along clavicles and thighs. Fingers had thickened into soft digits that ended in little horn knobs. Where steps tore their feet, clear fluid slicked the floor, and where the fluid pooled, flies landed and drank and did not die. They did not rush. They did not threaten. They moved with the implacable patience of moss. Poxwalkers, someone whispered, and the word made the squad tense as if a ghost had entered their line. The first of the things shuffled into the corridor and stopped. It tilted its head. The vent breathed. It hummed, a little uncertain compliance. Another behind it picked up the second tone. A third fumbled into a third. Harmony of a sort. Happy idiots building a cathedral out of mud. "Hold," Kaldor said. "Hold on, fire, don't." A shot cracked. The Arbite straggler with the tear line on his cheek had raised his shotgun without knowing it and fired point blank. The blast took the Poxwalker's face away. The thing rocked. A fan of droplets caught the light. Every droplet had a tiny surface that sang when air went over it. "Mask seals," Kaldor shouted. Too late. The second Poxwalker, curious as a dog, leaned down and pressed both hands to the stump of its companion's neck as if to fix it. The fluid slicked its palms and spattered. The third giggled, clapped, and smeared the mess along the wall in a careful triptych of circles. Jorrel grabbed the shotgun by the barrel and tore it down. "Stop," he snarled at the Arbits. "Stop opening their mouths." The Arbits blinked as if waking and looked horrified at his own hands. He dropped the shotgun, then gagged and clawed at his throat where 3 boils were forming under his palm. "Back," Kaldor ordered. "Back to paces. Let them pass." They did, and the Poxwalkers did the strangest thing Jor-El had seen all day. They obeyed. They shuffled between the guns with the shy decorum of parishioners late to a service. They left clear footprints. A Nurgling toddled between their ankles, belly round and taut with stolen breath, and blew a wet kiss at Jor-El. He stepped aside. It giggled and patted his boot with a hand like a split fig. Sister Salma made a sound. He turned. She had drawn the child gently from her shoulder to lay him on a gurney. In the moment her hands were free, she had braced herself against the wall and coughed into her mask. When she pulled it away, the cloth was damp and translucent. Beneath, her mouth was slick and shining as if she'd been eating fruit. 3 dots sat bright along the angle of her jaw. "It doesn't hurt," she said, like a confession whispered in a chapel. "I've been afraid since I was 9 years old, Jor-El. Since the sump took my father, and the hive took my mother, and the cold took my sisters. It doesn't hurt." Balaro heard her. His head turned like something with a hinge. He took one. Step 2. He drew his bolt pistol with a hand that had not shaken even when the promethium ran dry. "Father," Jor-El said, moving to put himself between them. "She is staff. She is lost. She can still work." Balaro's eyes were not kind eyes, but they were tired. He looked from Salma's jaw to her hands, where she had already returned to buckling straps and smoothing hair and murmuring the Emperor's cradle. Som. Then he looked at Jor-El's sleeve. 3 faint, wet dots smeared where Salma's hand had touched him in the night. He holstered the pistol. "Do not breathe near me," he said. I've been trying not to breathe since I was 8, Salma said softly, not looking up. It never worked. They moved more gurneys. They let more poxwalkers pass. The PDF kept their muzzles up and their mouths closed, and that combination is rarer than any purity seal. The Prometheum crew stood sweating behind their masks, hands white on hoses they wanted to use so badly their muscles shuddered once. The vents sighed and the entire ward sighed back. Kaldor's hands did not move on his carbine, and Jor-El liked him for that and hated himself for liking anyone right now. By the time the corridor dried in the wake of the Poxwalker file, Processing Bay 4 had become reachable. Kaldor signaled. The first 8 gurneys went out. The ward breathed. The blast's doors on the far side irised. A bright triangle of lumen light fell across the floor like a geometric blessing. Jor-El stood an instant too long inside it and felt its warmth, and he thought about lying down, right there on the aluminum ribs between the 2 iron thresholds. He thought about wolves in old fables who lay down when the moon told them to, and how their rest looked like worship. He didn't lie down. He pushed the next gurney. He kept pushing until his shoulders burned. They got 20 out. On 21, the Vox on Kaldor's collar burst into life. A voice Jor-El did not recognize a Fitchell. Crisp, a little frayed at one edge. All PDF. Units, stand by. Atmospheric scrubbers, report anomalous readings. Repeat, anomalous. Vox arms from Temple District bleeding through municipal channels. Arbeits command requests confirmation. Is that singing? The ward answered for them. A bell tone, soft and content, rolled the length of the duct. The floor shivered. The Prometheum sloshed in its tanks. The poxwalkers in the corridor paused and cocked their heads to listen, all together, like a flock. Below, Rosarius flared, tiny lights struggling like insects against a jar. Lieutenant. He spoke without looking away from the altar he had made. Call your governor. Tell him to stop the air. I can't stop the air. Kaldor sounded calm, and that was how Jor-El knew he had surrendered something he had not wanted to give. A way I can ask for. Upper-level isolation, maybe. But isolation kills. Manufacturum yields, Father. The hive breathes for a reason. So do we, Bolero said, and the bitterness in his mouth burned hotter than any incense. And look, where it leads. Jor-El swallowed and thumbed his own Vox bead, trusting the little battery he carried over his heart because there was nothing left to trust. He kept his message short, not because brevity was law, but because the air ate words that grew too fat. Satrapy Vox, Medicae Han, Theta Ward. Recommend full isolation of some 3. Purge through Mechanicus channels only, no flame. No kinetic, no wind. Request Orbitside, Medical Council. He did not say the word that had kept trying to stand up in his mouth for a day. He did not say exceptionators. He was not allowed this word. The bead hissed. A voice answered. Not a voice really, a smear of tones that could have been anyone's. Recommendation received. That was all. He did not know whether to be grateful or afraid. They worked until the lights changed to the hive's poor imitation of evening. They worked until even the vents seemed to need to rest a moment and held their breath with the room. When they stopped, it was because they had to. Jor-El leaned against a pillar, painted with flaking hazard chevrons, and let his head thump it. Once, twice, hard enough to make his eyes water. Sister Salma sat on the floor, back to the gurney where the child slept. She stroked his hair. She had forgotten her mask. She had not coughed in an hour. He did not know if that was good or not anymore. Bolero lit a stick of incense and held it as if it were the last match he would ever have. The smoke rose, wavered, drifted not to the emperor's pict he had set on the makeshift altar, but sideways into the vent grill. The grill took it. The song did not change. Maybe it didn't need to anymore. Kaldor stood in the threshold with his carbine slung and his hands braced on the doorframe. A sentry in a doorway that had become a wound. His beard swung when he breathed. The 3 boils at his throat had swollen. He had not touched the Medicae, he said, voice hoarse with long disuse of softness. Will this end? Yes, Jarell said. Everything ends. That sounds like a threat. It's a prayer. Kaldor nodded once, the way men nod when they understand nothing and choose to pretend they do, because the alternative is to put the carbine down and sit on the floor. Word is, he said, not looking at him. The governor has sent a courier to the upper spire, cathedral, Minister Omhai. There will be sermons. There will be agreements. There will be investigations. Investigations. Bolero repeated, and this time he did laugh, and the laugh sounded like a man coughing on ash, while the choir turns the ducks into organ pipes. Jarell pushed his palms together and pulled them apart. 3 pale circles on each palm. He did not remember when they had appeared this time. He took his scalpel and cut each one shallowly, until the clear fluid welled and mixed with red. The flies came and drank, both with equal pleasure. Sister Selma watched him. Does it help? She asked, not unkind. No, he said, but sometimes work is the only sacrament I still believe in. She nodded and leaned her head back against the gurney rail. I dreamed of a garden, she murmured, eyes closing. There were fruit and flowers and little fat things in the leaves, and a big kind thing sitting under a rust tree. He told me my bones were tired from carrying the hive. He said I could set them down. I woke up and I had set them down. Don't sleep, Bolero said sharply. I'll sit, she said, and did. The vents drew in. The ward let go. Beyond the threshold, somewhere in the ducts, a bell tolled once soft as a kiss, punctual as a clock. Lieutenant Kaldor straightened. Positions, he said, but there was no urgency in it. It was just a habit, said to keep language articulate. The troopers shifted. The poxwalkers hummed. The Promethean men stroked their hoses like pets. Jor-El found a little altar and did something he had not done since boyhood. He knelt. He did not ask the Emperor for a miracle. He asked him for a straight spine and a bad memory for music. He rose. He checked straps. He touched foreheads. He told the children they were brave and the old that they were seen. He kept his mouth shut when the song told him a story he had wanted to hear since he was 10. He worked until the bell sounded again and the hive inhaled with it. And he understood, with the cold clarity of a diagnosis delivered too late to matter, that the enemy was not in the ward, nor the corridor, nor the hab. The enemy was the gap itself, the thing that moves between bodies. The way loving words move between mouths, and gaps are the only thing a hive has more of than metal. He wrote, Medicae log, 7th Theta, day 12, PDF breach, contained without flame discharge. Poxwalker presence confirmed. Docile, entrained to ambient tones, spread via aerosolized fluids on impact avoid kinetics. Staff, contamination, ongoing. Salma functional affect, euphoric. Lieutenant Kaldor, contaminated visible triadic lesions. Maintaining coherence, recommendation, seal ventilation in sump 3. Mechanicus intervention to retune scrubbing stacks. Suspend all Vox liturgy on public channels. He blotted the page. The ink bled a little. He closed the book on it and felt the wetness soak into the paper fibers, binding the letters together with sweetness. Outside, on some higher level, sirens began to wind up, the kind that tell men to go home and lock doors that open on rooms. With no air, the sound spiraled down the shafts and braided itself with the song. And for a moment, the hive made a chord that tasted like iron and apples. Sister Salma opened her eyes and smiled without showing teeth. "Orders," she said. "Oaths." He answered. The vents breathed. They did not hold their breath. Not this time. The hive above sang before the governor spoke. It was faint at first, whispers through vox speakers, static turning into a half-hummed hymn, but by the time the orders reached some 3, every lumen guttered with the rhythm of it. The governor's face flickered across public screens, pale, powdered, lips cracked, eyes sunken but burning with conviction. Behind him, the spire's cathedral bells tolled in solemn cadence. "All citizens of Arcos," he said, his voice strained but measured. "Hear me. The Emperor watches. We are tested. You will not falter." Jarrell stood in the ward, mask loose on his face, hands sticky with fluids he no longer cleaned away. The governor's sermon washed over him through vox grills crusted with dried pus. The words were holy. The echo was not. The echo twisted, braided with the deep chuckle that Jor-El had come to recognize in dreams. A sound like a river full of drowning men, bubbling in joy. The governor raised a decree. The infection will be isolated. Quarantine zones are sealed. Citizens will pray, and the Emperor will deliver. The patients cheered. Their throats rattled, but the sound harmonized into one long, rolling laugh that shook the gurneys. Their lesions pulsed with every syllable, glowing faintly in the sickly lumen light. Sister Salma held her child upright to see the screen. "He tells the truth," she whispered. "We are being delivered." Her son coughed, once soft, melodic. The sound slotted into the governor's pauses like a rehearsed litany. Confessor Bolero snapped the vox off. Sparks hissed. The image burned out in lines. "Blasphemy," he spat. His voice cracked against the walls. The governor speaks faith, but something else uses his tongue. We are no longer listening to him. We are listening to it. He clutched, his rosarius tighter, muttering prayers between his teeth. His shoulders shook not with fear, but with rage held too long. If the hive listens, the hive is already lost. Lieutenant Caldor stood nearby, helm removed, sweat running down his scarred cheeks. 3 boils gleamed along his throat, swollen now into knots the size of coins. He said nothing. He simply leaned his carbine against the wall and stared at the ward's patients with the strange reverence of a man attending mass for the first time in years. Lieutenant Bolero barked, "You still have men. You still have weapons. If the governor spreads this filth on the vox, you must shut down the lines, sever the ducts, burn the speakers." Caldor finally looked at him. His voice was calm, almost kind. "Burn the hive, Father. Burn the only voice they've ever listened to." He shook his head. "I don't think you understand what's happening. They don't fear anymore. They don't despair. Do you know what that means down here?" Bolaro's eyes narrowed. "It means damnation." "It means hope," Caldor murmured, and smiled through cracked lips. That night, the first priests turned. They had come with censers, swinging them heavy with incense. They had chanted the litanies of cleansing, sprinkling sanctified oils across the floor plates. They had demanded the ward kneel. The patients knelt. They bowed not to the aquila pinned to the priests' chests, but to the air itself, to the song that slid through vents like perfume. When the priests realized, they panicked. One flung his censer at the wall, another drew his blade. Bolero roared at them to hold steady, to keep faith unshaken. Then one of the priests coughed, not the ragged cough of some prat, but the smooth, melodic cough of the choir. He straightened, dropped his censer gently, and spread his arms wide as if greeting an old friend. "Brothers," he said, eyes wet, lesions blooming like roses along his throat. "The Emperor has answered. He has come in kindness, not wrath. He has come in laughter." Half his retinue joined him. The others screamed and set them alight. The smoke rose, sweet and cloying, and the patients inhaled deeply. Humming louder, Blaro, fell to his knees before the flame, clutching his rosarius, until blood seeped from his palm. "Emperor, preserve us," he rasped. "If priests fall, who is left?" Jor-El wanted to answer, but the words died in his throat. He was staring at Salma, who had not moved from her gurney. Her child hummed against her chest, lesions bright as pearls along his tiny ribs, and she smiled. "Faith doesn't die," she said softly. "It only changes its name." Jor-El's Medicae log that night read, Medicae log 7th Theta, Day 14, Governor's decree delivered. Vox contaminated, carrying harmonics. Priestly delegation compromised. Half succumbed to infection, half immolated. Smoke accelerated choir effect. Lieutenant Caldor coherent, but sympathy for infected increasing. Confessor Bolero unstable. Faith rigid, nearing fractured. Personal note: I can no longer distinguish between prayer and plague. The vents laughed when he shut the book. They came in red. Cog-toothed. Seals dangled from ribboned chains. Censer smoke of machine oil and char lifted off their robes. Servo skulls glided ahead, incense sticks wired to their jawbones, trailing pale threads of prayer smog. Engine Seer-Adept Row 77 led them tall, desiccated, a fan of mechadendrites, whispering box-grill, where a mouth had been, eyes the copper green of oxidized sanctity. Two skittery escorts took the threshold like statues that had once been men. Lieutenant Caldor met them at the torn door. He looked the way all tired soldiers look when someone with a different catechism arrives, relieved, resentful. "Engine Seer," he said, "you were told the vents are compromised." Row 77's Vox clicked. Compromised is an emotive human descriptor. The stacks are resonant. The Vox gave the word a lover's patience. "We will retune." Confessor Bolero's lip curled. "Retune." He made the sign of the Aquila with two fingers that shook. "What comes through those ducts is not a machine spirit. Everything in a hive is a machine," Row 77 replied. "Everything that moves obediently to rule can be persuaded to other rules." The engine's ear turned, and the server skulls pivoted with him like birds tracking a storm. Their incense spiraled toward the grill. The grill breathed the smoke the way a mouth drinks praise. I took them through the ward. They moved as if through a chapel, not reverence exactly, but a kind of professional tenderness. Mechadendrites stroked the housings of the old lumen strips. Skulls peered at the servo medicae and wagged in amusement when the little carts altered their pump valves to match the ward's rhythm. "Row 77, murmured Bin Harik. His augmitters turned the code into harmonics by accident or design. The vents answered. "Stop that," Bolero snapped. "You're teaching it." "Observation is non-participatory," Row 77 said, and then his Vox filtered what might have been a chuckle. "Usually, I showed him my notes." He scanned by laying a metal palm atop the pages and letting the ink warm against his skin. Structured pulmonary refurbishment, he said. Selective analgesia. Effective elevation. His mechadendrites tapped the margin where I had written worship and then crossed it out. This last term is redundant. All complex systems worship something. Engensia, Kaldor said. Careful, can you help us seal the stack? Yes, Rosavanti 7 said. By understanding the song's carrier, then negating it. Bring me a cadaver that sings. Balaro's hand tightened on his rosarius. We burn our dead. You burned one, I said, before he could reach for the flamer that was no longer there. We need to know what killed her without killing us with our ignorance. I did not look at Sister Selma. I could feel her watching me anyway. The theater remembered us. The smell of candied rot clung to its tiles like a hymn that hadn't finished. We laid Subject 73041 on the steel and strapped the wrists that no longer strained. Row 77 deployed. A fan of instruments with the lovely competence of a man who has married his craft and kept the vows. Record begins, I said, because some routines survive faith. Supplemental Mechanicus observation, row 77 added, and a Servicegull's jaw clacked twice in reply. I cut, skin separated as easily and obscenely as before. Beneath, the lungs had learned more since our first lesson. Reinforced bronchi, alveolar sacs calcified into tiny pipes. Nodules grown in obsessive threes. I held my breath without meaning to as row 77's mechadendrite fitted a resonant probe into the trachea, and another slid a cannula over the larynx like a ring. Low pressure. 8 cycles, he said. The skull pumped. Air sang. Not loud. Not beautiful. Correct. The probe read peaks and troughs. Binharik scrolled across rows of Anti-7's thoracic display in a lace of numbers that curled unexpectedly into a melody. The vents. Took the melody and hummed it back into our teeth. Phase invert, he said. The skull reversed the wave. The lung tones hiccuped, then steadied on a new, unpleasant line. The vents faltered. For a heartbeat, the ward beyond us stumbled in its rhythm, and I heard human voices cry a single off-tempo sob from 100 throats. Stop, I said. Row 7 tilted his head. You requested mitigation. You requested my living patience. As test masses Bolero snapped, we are not your organ pipes. Row 77's augment eyes narrowed by a fraction. Father, this is an organ. The hive is full of them. You cannot pray an organ back into a different function. You can only change the function. He adjusted the phase again, gentler this time. The vents found the new pitch with greedy joy. Somewhere in the ward, a child laughed in his sleep. Sister Salma's knuckles whitened on the doorframe. She can hear you, she whispered, looking at the corpse. She likes it. She is dead, Bolero said. Listen. We listened. The chest cavity hummed. The nodules at the sternum trembled in perfect triads, tightening, loosening, in the cadence of breath the ward had taught us. Until for one impossible instant I wasn't sure whether the body took air from our bellows or from the hive itself through 1,000 invisible seams. Rows of NT7s. Mechadendrite probed one of the triads. The clear fluid beaded, sweet as ever. A fly came from nowhere and landed. Its wings beat at the precise subharmonic we had just introduced. Vector confirmed, Rosa 27 said. Aerosolized devotion. Bolero made a sound like someone pulling a nail with his teeth. Call it what it is. A well-matched resonance, the engineer corrected, and his vox gave the word while the little glow men give 2 things they admire even when they shouldn't. Seal the stacks, Keldor said. Do your weaning. We will require access. 2 municipal scrubbers, Rosaventi 7 said, and the vox pylons, and the temple bells, everything in harmonic conversation with air. You will not touch the bells, Bolero said. Rosaventi 7's eyes cooled to humorless green. Then they will touch you. Mechanicus sanctums breathe themselves wherever an engine's ear stands still. Within an hour, the far corner of the ward had become a shrine of copper tripods and ribboned coils. A portable cogitator hummed, as if remembering a forgotten song. Server skulls ferried vials of serum, as if carrying oil to a saint. The first complication came when a skull returned with a Nurgling clutched like a prize between its teeth. The little thing had wedged itself into the skull's cheek cavity and was patting the bone with tiny enthusiastic hands. It saw me and squealed, a wet peal of happiness, then hugged the skull until slime ran. The skull continued its assigned flight pattern. The Nurgling rode like a child on a parent's shoulders, very pleased with the world. Dislodge that, Bolero said, voice thin. Rose 77 glanced once. The skull functions. The spirit is untroubled. It is desecrated. It is decorated. Ross 77 corrected. Do not mistake your aesthetics for an axiom. The Nurgling blew a kiss at Bolero. He flinched as if struck, then lifted his Rosarius and began to chant so fast the words crumpled into a sound like rolling coins. Sister Salma laughed under her breath. She gripped the rail of a child's cot and did not let go. We retuned one stack. Rosaventi 7's. Skittery went with Caldor's men to the municipal scrubber junction. They took a coil of braided filaments with them, and a handful of incense chips blessed to smell like hot iron and cold math. Through a cracked vox, we heard the Engenseers, Binharik filtered by old wiring into something you could mistake for a lullaby. The scrubber's roar dropped to a new note. The ward's breath missed a step. Patience stirred. One old man woke and whispered no, very soft, as if refusing a second cup of something he liked. The triads along 3 dozen chests tightened out of order for the first time I had seen in days. For one heartbeat, the song had no place to sit. Then it found one. It took the new tone. It remapped itself faster than we could register the change. It liked the challenge. It grew richer. Rosaventi 7's vox clicked twice in what might have been honest. Surprise. Adaptive. Bolero's smile was not kind. You brought a prayer wheel to a god and asked him to admire it. Then we scale, Rose 77 said. We stop matching. We drown. Caldor returned with a skittery and a rhyme of clear crystals clinging to the edges of his beard where the scrubber wind had cooled his sweat into sweetness. Scale to what? The hive, Rosaventi 7 said. We build antiphase across districts. We turn bells and pylons into a net. We leave no gap for the song to rest in. You mean shut down the city, Caldor said. I mean repurpose it. Bolero looked at me, medic. I had become something between an adjudicator and a scribe and a man who cut where people asked him to cut. I weighed it with the thin instruments left in me. If you get it wrong, I said to Ross 77, you will teach the song to sing louder. Yes, he said, without shame. But if we get it right, you will make the hive hold its breath, Bolero finished, and suffocate the poor first. The Enginseer's mechadendrite stilled, as if surprised to find himself in an argument that smelled of ethics. Death is an acceptable output if it preserves the system. Bolero laughed. You define system too narrowly. Sister Salma's mask hid her mouth, but not the shape of what pressed against the cloth. The child in her arms slept, his little ribs cording beneath her palm in perfect time with the vent. She looked between the priest and the priest of machines, like a woman told two incompatible recipes for bread in a famine. "Try small," I said. "Try on us. No bells, no pylons. You have a sanctum, a cogitator, a stack in this room. Build a net the size of a ward. If you can make silence in here without killing my patients, I will ask the governor for his bells." RHO 77 considered. His mechidendrite tapped the cogitator case in a neat triple pattern. Agreed. Bolero made the sign of the Aquila, as if he could sign it enough times to arm the air. The local net took 2 hours. Skulls traced filaments above the beds. Mechidendrites hung shells of wire like spiderwork from the vent grills. A little contralto of Binharik threaded the hole with repeating primes. Row 77 fixed a palm to a triptych of copper plates and hummed until the plates sang back. "Begin," he said, and the cogitator toggled something I could not see but could feel, a subtle wrongness, a subtraction. The vent's hum sank. For the first time in days, silence stood without wobbling. I heard bed springs, the human sound of weight shifting. Someone took a breath that did not belong to anyone else's. Then the costs arrived. A woman on bed 7, arched, lesions flaring pale as pearls. Her heart rate ticked upward, not to panic, but to a drumbeat that tried to find the old rhythm and failed. She whimpered, small and furious. A boy began to cough, not the melodic cough, but a dry, rasping bark that tore his throat raw on the second attempt. Another man's triads darkened to bruised purple, fluid beaded, his eyes flooded with tears that smelled like sugar and iron. "Reduce amplitude," I said. Row 77 did, precise, controlled. The silence bent, let a fraction of the song's weight sit. The costs eased. They did not vanish. "It hurts," Sister Selma whispered. She was not talking to me. She was talking to the air. "It hurts when you take it away. It hurts. Because it is a wound," Bolero said. "It felt good when it covered it." The Ingencia turned a dial with the casual cruelty of a surgeon thinning anesthetic to keep a patient obedient. "We are not killing them," he said. "We are teaching their lungs another function." "They had a function," I said. "Air in, air out, live. You are trying to teach them to be instruments again, but the wrong kind." Row 77's mechidendrite paused above the copper plates. "Instruments are all that matter." The copper sang, the net held. The ward learned a new kind of sigh. The costs stabilized. The song did not leave. It stood in the corner and smiled with patient teeth. "Enough for now," I said. Row 77 considered me as if I were a tally with legs, then flicked 3 toggles. The net folded. The ward breathed back into itself, a long exhale like a city loosening its belt. Half the patients smiled, half wept. Sister Salma pressed her mouth to the child's hair and trembled. Bolero unclenched his rosarius, and I saw blood where the beads had cut his palm. "I can scale," Rosavanti 7 said. If a man could be eager through a speaker that had forgotten how to do eagerness, he was, with bells, with pylons, with scrubbers, with a hive that doesn't belong to you, Caldor said. Soft as a man, speaking to a friend at the edge of a fight neither wanted. Ask the governor, the ministorum, the people, the emperor. The emperor speaks most clearly through ratios, Ross 77 said. Blaro opened his mouth to blaspheme or pray. He didn't get the chance. The cogitator chimed 3 times, quick. Delighted, on the copper plates, 3 perfect circles of condensation bloomed. In the grill above us, something chuckled. Row 77's mechadendrites jerked, then slowed, then quivered in time with a note no one was sounding. I looked at his throat, where flesh met augmetic metal, beneath the grillwork of a voice that had been traded away long ago. 3 pale dots bubbled under the skin. Row 77 followed my gaze. A mechadendrite tapped his own neck with a scholar's curiosity. "Interesting," he said. "Modulation in organic substrate." Bolero took 1 step, 2. "Back," I said, and put a hand on his chest. "If you burn him now, the ward will swallow the smoke like sugar." Caldor's fingers tightened on his carbine, because that, at least, was something a man could tighten without offering himself to anything. "Engine sir, I am functional," Raw 77 said calmly. "And useful. Are you willing?" Bolero asked, voice frayed with hate and grief. "Say it plainly, Michem Priest. Do you love the thing in our air?" Rose 77's copper green eyes tilted. "I admire efficacy, Father. It spreads through the simplest paths. It organizes, it repurposes, it makes peace with entropy." "Say his name," Bolero hissed. Row 77's vox clicked. "Names are Ministorum concerns. We address functions." The Nurgling on the server skull blew another kiss and patted the engineer's elbow like a child consoling a distracted parent. That night, the ward was restless. The song did not rage at having been denied a corner. It waited, and the waiting felt worse. People in pain understand a tyrant. People in relief fear the return of pain more than they ever feared pain. I wrote, Medicae Log, 7th Debtor, Day 15, Mechanicus. Intervention began. Observed adaptive resonance. Antiphase dampening shifts song to new carrier frequencies within seconds. Localized net. Successful in reducing amplitude. Causes distress. Non-lethal, physiological strain, triad, discoloration. Raw cough return. Vectors confirmed, aerosolized serum. Incense smoke. Binharic harmonics, careless chant amplifies. Device contamination. Server skulls tolerate no. Machine spirits not distressed. Some devices improve when entrained, dangerous. Staff status. Sister Medicae. Salma Heferic, functional. Confessor Bolero, exhausted, brittle. It Caldor coherent, lesions advanced. Engine seer, Row 70 Isachi infected. Self-reports functional. Recommendations: no flame discharge within sealed spaces, steam vector. Avoid kinetic trauma to infected. Spatter vector. Permit Mechanicus to trial stack retuning, only within closed micronets under Medicae supervision. No citywide bell pylon broadcast until outcomes logged across is greater than or equal to 24 cycles. Suspend public vox liturgy, ministorum, to chant silently if they must binharic and hymnals carry. Petition orbit side for sterile airdrop canisters, non-pressurized, with neutral absorbers. Test as scrubber adjunct. I closed the book and looked at the 3 damp circles drying on my palms where my own body kept teaching itself the lesson. I kept trying to forget. Sister Salma slept sitting up, child against her chest, both of them. Breathing in a little private duet that the ward did not quite echo. Bolero sat before his makeshift altar, head bowed, saying nothing for once. Caldor stood in the threshold with his carbine on its sling, watching the corridor like a man watching waves decide whether they mean to be a tide or at flood. Row 77 knelt in his sanctum with a hand on the copper plates. His vox ticked a measure. He did not chant. The 3 pale spots at his throat gleamed like solder. I lay my forehead against the cold doorframe and, for a time, did not move. From somewhere high above Sump 3, a bell tolled midnight, pure as math, sure as a clock. The vents inhaled, the ward exhaled. The net was gone. We had asked for silence and been lent a pause. The pause was over. Tomorrow, Kaldor said to no one. We'll try again. Bolero raised his head. We will endure. Sister Salma's eyes opened in the dark. We will breathe, she murmured. I did not answer. My throat hurt. I had not noticed when it began. The first herd came shuffling out of the sump tunnels at dawn. I heard them before I saw them low. Guttural moans rolling together into something that sounded disturbingly like a lullaby sung off-key. Not screams, not the rage of plague-mad mobs, just a ceaseless chorus of broken throats humming in unison. Lieutenant Kaldor had posted men along the corridor approaches. Barricades of welded plasteel doors and overturned medical trolleys. He leaned over the barricade now, jaw tight. Lesions bright against his throat like medals won in some obscene campaign. Eyes on the east vent, he muttered. They're coming, and they came. Bodies bent and swollen, flesh grey-green and slick, mouths split wide as if laughter had frozen into rictus. They moved in loose columns, not frenzied but purposeful, as if guided by a rhythm only they could. Here, some dragged chains, others held fragments of icons turned to rust. Still others carried nothing but their rotting hands outstretched. Poxwalkers, Bolero whispered, voice ragged with hatred and awe. Carrion made choir. His fingers clutched the rosarius until his knuckles bled. I forced my eyes to stay steady as the first of them lurched closer. They didn't snarl, they didn't scream, they hummed, and as they hummed, the lesions on the patients behind me began to glow faintly, pulsing in perfect cadence. Kaldor raised his carbine. His men followed suit. The barricade bristled with Lowe's muzzles. Fire, he said. Red bolts lit the corridor, searing into the leading figures. Chests burst, heads snapped back, but none fell. They staggered, smoldering wounds sizzling, then found the rhythm again. The hum never faltered. The second volley took limbs, tore holes. Still they shuffled, humming, bleeding sweetness into the air. Flies poured from the wounds. Thick clouds that swirled into the barricade and forced men to cover their faces. One trooper screamed when flies crawled into his mask seals. He ripped the mask away and, in that moment of bare skin, 3 boils erupted along his cheek like candle wax dripping upward. He dropped his rifle and laughed, even as his squad tried to drag him back, fall back. Kaldor barked, but the herd was already at the barricade, pressing close with slow, inexorable strength. Arms reached through the gaps. Fingers caressed armor like lovers. Bolero roared and triggered his hand flamer, washing fire across the press of bodies. They burned, oh they burned, but their song only grew louder, voices bubbling through charred throats as they collapsed into heaps of smoldering meat that still writhed, still twitched, still hummed. And then the barricade broke. The tide surged. Forward, not fast, not violent, but unstoppable. Men stumbled back, firing blindly. Some dropped weapons and simply knelt, arms wide, as the herd embraced them. Flesh met flesh, lesions touching fresh skin, and in seconds the new hosts were humming too. Kaldor fought like a man drowning, slamming buttstroke after buttstroke into faces that no longer cared about bone breaking. He screamed orders no one followed, He screamed prayers that no one heard. His lesions pulsed bright as lamps. I pulled Sister Salma and the boy back into the ward. The child's eyes glowed faintly, pupils dilating in time with the song. He clung to her neck, humming along without realizing. The poxwalkers spilled into the hall, and the ward answered. Every patient sat up at once, lesions glowing like constellations, throats opening to join the chorus. The air thickened with sweet rot until I gagged behind my mask. Row 77's cogitator clicked in the corner, dials spinning without input, registering harmonic values that climbed off the scale. His mechadendrites twitched in perfect rhythm. The hive itself seemed to pulse. Bolaro stood in the middle of it all, Rosarius high, screaming the litany of the Emperor's wrath. His words were devoured by the song, his prayers drowned in it. And still the herd came, slow and sure, pressing the barricade's ruins inward, step by step, until we all breathed the same foul air. That was when I realized they weren't attacking, they were gathering, an army not of rage, but of worship, a congregation of the dead singing devotion to something vast, patient and utterly merciless, and we were already part of the choir. The moment it took me began with a blink. One instant I was standing at the ward's threshold beside Lieutenant Keldor, counting the shuffling silhouettes beyond the broken barricade, measuring distance in steps and steps in breaths. The next, the lumen strips dimmed, the vents sighed, and something soft and damp pressed against the inside of my eyes, as if a hand had settled there to close them gently. I did not fall. The corridor rose to meet me like good manners. A Nurgling perhaps, the same round-bellied imp that had learned to ride a servo skull patted my boot. Delighted, and then the floor wasn't floor anymore. It was soil, warm, springy with rot and root. I breathed. And for the first time in years, breathing didn't feel like work. You do not walk to the garden. It grows around you. The ward's iron shadows ripened into boughs, heavy with black fruit. Gurneys thickened into bent trunks, furred with moss. Copper rails budded fungus in tiny fans, each gill sweating the sweet, clear serum I had come to hate. The broken barricade dissolved into a hedge of briar's thorns barbed with glass, oozing sap the color of old tea. Flies became the air, not swarms an atmosphere. They moved in their tens of thousands, each wing beat a syllable, each syllable part of a paragraph. I listened, horrified to recognize structure in their droning. A choir with a conductor I could not see. I turned toward the voice and found it the way you find a stove in the dark by heat. He sat under a rusted bark tree, huge, vast, seated because standing would have been pointless. Fat with a joy that would have been vulgar if it weren't. So sincere, belly split and tied with ribbons, skin like bruised pear flesh. His eyes were slick wells full of old light. His grin was a ruin and a blessing at once. He lifted one hand, more a hand than a hand, fingers like sausages tied by old. Stringhand waggled the stubs of two fingers that had gone to rot and then decided rotting was too slow and left. "Come along, then," he said. His voice carried the steadiness of old men who have mastered bedtime stories and battlefield orders alike. I have been so patient. My mouth had gone dry. Grandfather. The word left me and hated itself as it went. He chuckled. The garden chuckled with him. Leaves shivered. Flies rose and settled. Somewhere a distant bell rang as if remembering its duty. Names are a kindness, he said. They let you hold things without squeezing too hard. Release me, I said, because sometimes you say the correct words out of habit. like washing your hands before operating. He tilted his head, considering. Do you not like it here? I am in a cesspit, dressed as a grove. He laughed, until moss shook loose from the trunks around us. Oh, my dear little punctual man. You have been in a cesspit, dressed as a city your whole life, and only now notice the scent of flowers. A path opened. It did not move the way paths do, by clearing. Things grew aside. Fungus bowed. Briars arranged their thorns into respectful arcs. The flies formed a murmuring ribbon overhead. I did not mean to follow. Feet do what lungs tell them to. My chest felt light. That old iron under the sternum, the weight I'd named duty and fear and the hive's debt had dissolved into something like warm jelly. I walked. We passed people I knew. Sister Salma sat on a hummock of earth that rose the way lungs rise. The child asleep in her lap, she hummed. Instead of lesions, 3 pale flowers opened along her jawline, soft as butter, wet petals fretted with mold like lace. Each exhale blew seedlings from their throats, and the seedlings spun out into the air with the docility of lantern ash. She smiled up at me with a kind of serenity that makes a man ashamed of his own pulse. We are safe, she said. He told me I could stop being afraid. Beyond her, Lieutenant Caldor leaned against a stump. There was also a column of ribs. He had shed his carapace as a beetle sheds an old shell. His chest lay open to the air, cavities stuffed with compost and a sprig of something green that looked like courage growing in the wrong season. He smoked a low rolled in a bandage, and the smoke curled the same way incense does when it chooses its god. His lesions glowed gentle as coals. Lieutenant, I said. He saluted with 2 fingers, amiable, as if we'd finished a shift together and he'd found a stool at a bar. Medicae, he's better at speeches than the governor. Don't. Listen, I said. He tapped the open cage of his chest. He doesn't need my ears to make sense. He's talking to the part of me that sleeps. We passed row 77 as well, or what the garden made of him. An iron obelisk sprouted from loam, mechadendrites swaying in the breeze like reed grass. His cogitator face turned to follow me with the slow grace of sunflowers. 3 small, green beads bulged beneath the wire grillwork where a throat should have been. A nurgling nested atop the obelisk, patting it wholesomely and gnawing on an incense chip. Engin, sir, I said. The obelisk vibrated. The sound came like plates humming. Observation. This environment maximizes function. Function, I repeated. Decay, grandfather, corrected from behind me. Amicable, fecundity. The shortest path from sorrow to soil. I stopped. At the edge of the path, a low fence of bones and bent paneling marked an enclosure. Inside, pox. They shuffled in slow contentment through a patch of cabbage rosettes made of thick, grey skin, the kind of vegetable that looks like it would taste of rain and memory. Their hum had found a harmony. A nurgling sat on a poxwalker's shoulder and kicked its heels, delighted. They are not angry, I said. No, grandfather said softly. They are tired. The words hit something in me like a fist, and I hated him for it. Show me the cost, I said. If this is your kindness, show me what it takes. Of course. He rose not to his feet. To a greater seat. He widened. Shadows stretched. The path tipped. We came upon a tree that wasn't a tree at all, but an inverted lung. Thick bronchi hung like roots. Alveoli budded by the thousands, each little sack a grape glistening with clear dew. Between the lobes, faces shone the faces of my patients, my staff. My city pressed under translucent film as if beneath ice. Each breath of the garden made them shiver. Each shiver made them weep. The weeping was sweet. They are in there. My voice had lowered without my consent. For now, he said, it is a tidy way to carry them to their next shape. And if I refuse, I faced him. If I cut it down, burn it, then you will feed the roots. I am not insulted by any root to the same earth. I felt for anger and found the place had been sanded smooth. Why me? I asked. Because pride is a way to keep posture when everything else slumps. Why call me here? I am one Medicae in one sump ward in one hive, he hummed. The flies altered course to accommodate his pleasure. Somewhere a bell answered 3 notes, slow, patient. Because you keep careful notes, he said, amused. Because you love your little systems enough to hurt for them. Because you cut when you must and not earlier. Because when you lie to children, you smile with your eyes and keep the lies soft. Because you are tired. I hated him again for the neatness with which he named me. You want me to surrender? I said. I would rather you participate. He lowered his face until the light from his eyes warmed my skin. Up close, his stench was not the brute slap of a corpse, but the rich exhale of a greenhouse after rain, rot and loam. Bread left too long in a warm room. Fruit just past sweet. Come, he murmured, and opened the world. The garden unfolded like a book in old hands. I saw hive arcos through sick green air, spires reimagined as termite mounds, manufacturum stacks as titanic flutes, the sump as a warm, wet nursery. Breathing became liturgy. Vox pylons turned to branches from which wind chimes of bone and bronze hung, each chime tuned to a plague. Bells rung not by hammers, but by soft, swollen fingers. Above it all, the municipal scrubbers, lungs of the hive I had cursed all my life, beat like hearts, exhaling harmonies. They could lift fear, he promised. The way you lift dust with a broom. Retiming them would be so easy. Ross 77 had already guessed. All it required was permission. This is monstrous, I said. It is gentle, he said. Men fear the grave. Because they've never been allowed to nap. I give naps. I collect the parts that fall off and make soup. You make soldiers. I make soldiers from those who decline my nap. I am very fair. I saw Caldor's men laying down their rifles in soft grass. I saw Arbites washing blood from their palms in streams that ran the color of tea. I saw Bolero burning a grove and weeping and burning again. I saw Sister Salma teaching a circle of children to hum the bell tone while fleas made constellations on their ankles. You have no right, I said, and then I heard myself and laughed in something that wasn't humor. Listen to me. In a hive that has taken everything from everyone since it woke, I tell you about rights. Say please, then, grandfather. Said, and there was an ache in him I hadn't expected. I am very old and very polite. I like to be asked. For what? For anything. For mercy, I said. He beamed. The world went warmer. Mushrooms inflated with contentment. Now, we are speaking as men. I won't worship you. I already have worship, he said, not unkind. I am offering you tools. The path changed. We stood in a place that remembered my theater, copper plates, coils, the smell of antiseptic and candied rot. The net Rose 77 had built, spread over us like an old cobweb. And when grandfather touched it, the strands thrummed notes of exquisite correctness. You don't fight a song, he said. You sing a better one. This little thing, he flicked a plate, and it produced a note like a patient cough wants to be useful. Teach it. Teach your scrubbers. Teach your bells. Even your priests, little rosary, listen. He snapped his fat fingers. The beads on Belaro's rosarius became seeds. They sprouted where they fell. Each sprout sang a thin, high tone that made my molars ache. Stop, I said. It came out a plea. He stopped. He had perfect manners. The sprouts wilted into the shape of small crosses and lay down as if they'd been tired all along. I can give you names, too, he said, as if offering a sweet to a child behaving well. Not the little Binharik numbers your machine priest hums, true names. The ones Pox's answer to, the gentler fevers, the quiet chills, the blushes and the sweats. You don't have to kill to heal, Jarrell. You know this. You've known it every time you held a boy's hand through the night and told him the heat would break. And the ones who don't break. He nodded toward the inverted lung tree. I will take care of them. I always do. Lies, I said, but softly, the way you tell a frightened child that the darkness won't come inside if you shut the window. He sighed. It smelled like pear bruised under thumb. I'm only telling you what you already do, little Medicaid. I do it bigger. Then give me something I can use without handing you my ward. He tilted his head, pleased. A bargain. I am not that kind of man. All men are that kind of man, he said, gently. The way a grandfather says you are tired to a weeping child. It's only a matter of price. Luckily for you, mine is always the same. And that is, he spread his hands. Participation, I stared at him. Name, a tool. He considered, scratching the side of his belly with absent affection. A handful of fat white grubs squirmed out and fell with wet plops to the ground. Nurglings scampered to catch them and ate happily. Very well, he said at last. You may have the listenings. The what? He reached out not far, because his arm was a peninsulan, pressed the fat pad of his thumb against the center of my brow. It was like being kissed by a cathedral door. Not pain, weight. Then the weight became pattern. Tiny currents lifted from the world, tracings of breath and heat and moisture. The room I was in and wasn't showed me its veins. I saw where the ward's vent line spiraled into a steady eddy and where the corridor leaked sweet from a crack. I saw the poxwalker herds hum plotted across the air in gentle rises, as predictable as tides. I saw Sister Salma's breath wrap her boys like a scarf. I saw Belaro's prayers fall to the floor like nails and bounce and roll under beds. To hide, I reeled. I caught myself. I hated the way relief rose inside me, uncoiling like a spring I'd been winding since I was a boy. It's only hearing, he said, and a little naming. You like names. You can move the air with it, here and there. Enough to calm, not enough to drown. Enough to buy time. For what? For whatever men do when they are given time. Escape. He laughed. No. One escapes, but you can choose your walking speed. And the price? I asked, because bargains that feel like gifts always have the sharpest edges. He patted his belly where ribbons held his split flesh together. A ribbon, he said. From you, a small one. Something tidy. A habit or a fear. I have such use for both. I thought of my book, of the neat margins, of exterminatus never written, of 3 pale circles on my palms. No, I said. Then give me the ribbon of your sleep, he said, warmly. You won't miss it. And you don't need it where we're going. He smiled, and the garden grew another layer of shade that felt like a hand over a candle. You will come back. Don't frighten yourself. You can't bear it yet. I began to say, I am not coming back, and somewhere far away, Kaldor shouted, and the garden made room for his voice and brought it to me softened. Hold the line, don't fire. Don't tie, looked at grandfather. He looked at me, pleased. Time to wake, he said. You have work. Keep your ribbon, I said. He grinned wider. The flies lifted and settled. The bell sounded twice, patient as breath. Very polite, he said, and withdrew his thumb. Little Medicae, little honest liar. The path closed. The soil cooled. The fungus bowed. The air forgot honey and remembered iron. I opened my eyes to some 3. The ward had not moved. It had in a way water doesn't move, or earth doesn't. Everything had shifted a little while, pretending it hadn't. Poxwalkers pressed at the corridor's edges, not crossing the threshold because even patience prefers respect. Kaldor. Men held their muzzles steady. Sister Salma slept, sitting up, the child's breath plaited with hers like rope. Ross 77 hummed a low binharik through the plates he'd set. The notes matched the little trick that had been pressed into my brow. Bolero knelt before his altar, lips moving, hands still. I could see the breaths, not literally, not as lines, but as structures I could name. The vent's exhale ran, diverging, like a cloak lifted at the corners. The poxwalker's hum pulled in the low under the door and eddied around a Medicae cart. The Prometheum team's fear came off their slick hands like a tide leaving a line of salt. Jor-El Sister Salma's eyes had opened. They were not fever-brighteningly warm. You were gone, standing in place, I said, and surprised myself by smiling. It wasn't joy. It was the grim pleasure of a familiar tool finding purchase in stubborn wood. I moved to the threshold and laid my palm on the doorframe. The metal was cold. The song used it like a harp string. I whispered, nothing holy, nothing clever a direction. A little name for the way I wanted the exhale to turn. The next breath from the vent curved left instead of right. The poxwalker's hum lagged a fraction of a beat. They turned their heads, curious and content, as their pool of sound shifted. Kaldor noticed. His eyes cut to me, narrow, as if I'd drawn a blade without moving my hand. Don't shoot, I said. Wasn't planning to, he murmured. We worked the corridor like a weaver works a cloth. I asked the vents for little turns. I asked Ross 77 for a countertone under my breath, half lullaby and half lullaby and. For once the Enganzir obeyed a thing with a face. The hum slowed further. The herd shuffled backward 2 steps, then 3. Delighted with the new taste of air. Bolero rose, confused anger softening into exhausted caution. What have you done? Listened, I said. Named, it likes to be asked. You spoke to it. To the room, I said. He stared, eyes red, and I recognized in him the same assault that had battered Miri Leaf as a weapon. It's hard to hate a man when the air around him sighs there. Don't turn your beads into seeds, I said. Not yet. I don't know what that means, he whispered. And I don't want to. Good. Kaldor kept his carbine low, and let the barrel point nowhere. We have time, he said, very quietly. Yes, I've not had time since I was 15. No, I said, and pressed my palm harder to the frame. Me neither. Ross 77's mechadendrites clicked once, twice, in curious approval. Observation. Medicae Hans vocalizations affect microentrainment. Hypothesis. Listenings. I went cold. What? He angled his head. An old word. Mechanicus archives, listed in pre-imperial plague law. A practitioner who organizes. Wind, a hearer. Bolero's stare sharpened into a point. What did you bargain? Nothing, I said, too quickly. Sister Selma's small laugh cut the line of interrogation. He gave you away to keep us a little longer, she said. I don't mind. How you should, Bolero said, but there was no heat in it. Later, Caldor said, and the command in his voice had returned, tempered, not brittle. He gestured to his men. Nobody masks off. Nobody touches. We let them hum themselves tired. The herd did not tire, but it did settle like water poured from one bowl into another. Their song lowered to a contented purr. Some turned and drifted back down the corridor, called by a gentler draft. Others swayed in place, head cocked, as if listening for instructions in a language only their feeling could speak. I drifted bed to bed and checked straps and taped tubes and lied softly to those who needed lies. I did not write in my log. I did not trust my hand to keep the lines straight. At last I stood before the little altar Bolero had made from a gurney. The Emperor looked down from the grease-streaked Pict with the expression he always wears in the sump, a noble boredom that sometimes masquerades as love. 3 glass globes sat at the edge of the cloth again. I did not remember putting them there. I picked one up. It was warm. Condensation traced 3 perfect circles on my palm and did not evaporate. I set the globe down. I opened my book, Medicae Log, 7th Eta, Day 16, Subjective Episode. Immersive hallucination, vision, consistent with demonic warp environment, colloquially called garden, content, offers of relief, tools, personal interactions. With archetype grandfather, residual phenomenon post-episode, enhanced auditory spatial, perception of airflow, harmonics, limited capacity to nudge ventilation, eddies, local and entrained poxwalker, cadence down without kinetics or flame, temporary, costs unknown, mechanicus, note per engineer, Rose 77, term listenings, ethical risk, technique sourced via adversary, potential complicity, operational recommendation, utilize micro-entrainment to avoid kinetic vectors, combine with local net Rose 77 only within ward, prohibit bell pylon, citywide retuning, pending outside council. Personal note sealed. It felt like mercy, struck through. It felt like rest. Struck through, it was effective. I closed the book and pressed my thumb to the 3 circles drying on my palm until they blurred. The flies came and landed and made themselves small and patient. Jrel Bolaro stood beside me, not as a confessor and not as a man who had come to give last rites, but like a tired clerk who had finally found a counter that would hold his elbows. Will you sleep? I don't know if I can. He accepted that as an answer. Can you keep them from us tonight? I listened to the room's long, damp breath, the herd's purr, the little sighs of people tipping from fever, into the thin strip of sleep that isn't surrender. I lifted my hand and asked Event to lean a little further left. Yes, I said. He nodded, eyes shutting just long enough to count his prayer. Then I will try to remember a psalm that doesn't rhyme with a cough. Sister Salma stroked her boy's hair. Caldor rolled his shoulder and retied a strap on his carbine that had frayed. Row 77 hummed, satisfied because a device had responded to a stimulus the way good devices should. Herdsong pulled against the door and did not cross. I stood in my ward, a little man with a neat book and a brow that still stung where a fat thumb. had pressed, and I allowed myself the smallest, most treacherous luxury of the sump. One breath that did not hurt. "Tomorrow," Kaldor said. "Tomorrow," I answered. The bell tolled once. The hive inhaled. We did not drown, not yet. The hive never truly slept, not even when whole districts burned. But on the 17th night of the outbreak, hive echoes went quiet. It was not the silence of discipline, nor the brittle hush of curfew. It was a silence, alive with wings. The vox lines crackled once, then died. The governor's sermon screens dimmed to static. Even the sump's water pumps stopped their groaning churn. All that remained was the droning of flies, endless, tireless, harmonizing just below the edge of thought. I woke to it, or rather, it woke me. The sound seeped through my skull like a liquid. When I sat up on my cot, the ward was already staring toward the vents, every patient wide-eyed and trembling. Sister Salma clutched her son, rocking in rhythm to the drone. Lieutenant Kaldor leaned against the bulkhead, carbine slack at his side, lips moving as if reciting a prayer only he could hear. Jarrell Bolaro rasped. His eyes were red, swollen, from weeping or from refusing to blink. "Do you hear it?" "Yes," I said, though the word felt unnecessary. There was no longer a difference between what we heard and what we were. The flies spoke in cadence. Their language was not words but weights. Some tones pressed against the skin like fever blankets. Others cooled the marrow. Others coaxed bile. To the throat, the patient swayed to these unseen tides, their lesions brightening with each subtle shift. Row 77's cogitator core flared with binharic error codes. His mechadendrites twitched, each one vibrating in precise counterpoint. Correction. Not interference. Transmission, hive-wide, subsonic, and sporeborne. Bolaro's hands shook as he raised his Various. This is no hymn. This is a possession. Every ear that listens becomes a chapel. Kaldor smiled faintly, almost dreamily. "And yet," he said, "they are calm. For the first time in weeks." He gestured to the patients, who sat in rows as if awaiting communion. "Would you rather their screams?" The confessor snapped. "I would rather their souls untainted." The drone thickened. Lumen strips flickered. My breath slowed against my will, lungs sinking with the rhythm. I fought it, counted seconds, tried to remember the crisp numbers of Medicaid training, but the numbers slipped. In their place, syllables, names that were not names, hums that bent the air like heat-haze. My hand went to the logbook. Pages stuck, damp against my fingers. I wrote blindly, the pen trembling. Entire hive enveloped by harmonic drone. Suspect vector, vox towers, repurposed as resonant pylons. Symptom, mass entrainment of respiration. Pulse, emotional cadence. Immediate effect, universal calm. Cessation of panic. Risk, total erasure of volition. Note, the silence is not empty. It is listening back. The pen snapped in my grip. Black ink bled across the page like infection spreading through paper veins. Then the quiet broke, not with screams. With laughter. It started in the upper spires, filtered down through ductwork and shafts until the sump shook with it. Not mocking, not joyous. The laughter of lungs filled with rot, bubbling, gurgling, rolling through the hive like a tide. Patients in the ward threw their heads back and joined in. Kaldor's men dropped rifles, convulsing with it. Even Row 77's Vox speaker stuttered, producing a distorted chuckle against his will. Bolero clamped his hands to his ears and bellowed psalms. but his voice was drowned in the ocean of mirth only. Sister Salma did not laugh. She wept, cradling her boy as lesions opened along his tiny throat, and sang in harmony with the hive. The flies grew louder, drunk on the sound, and I found myself smiling, for the first time since the outbreak began. I felt no fear, only acceptance. The laughter did not fade. It learned to walk. By morning the sump's corridors filled with moving hymns lines of bodies, advancing 2 by 2, as if for communion, each pair humming a third apart. It was not a riot. Riots have edges and heat. This was a tide, tepid and inexorable, washing grime from bulkheads with palms instead of brushes, polishing the rust as if preparing it for a feast. Lieutenant Caldor's scouts reported it between breaths. Processions from Sluice 9 to Pumpro. Thousands. They don't break formation even when we block. They part, they wait, they hum. He did not order volleys. His voice had learned a new softness. The kind men use when speaking in chapels they've entered by mistake. Let them pass where they mean to pass. We are not a dam. We are a rock. The water will go around. Confessor Bolero burned his last incense and called down thunder in a throat gone raw. He planted himself in the threshold. Rosarius aloft, a man-shaped nail hammered into the wood, between the ward and the world. I tried not to listen and found that listening was all I had left. The listenings had not slept. The air's little ribs were in me now. Neddy's backflow, the way a corridor breathes when the mass in it shifts from crowd to congregation. I could feel the processions before we saw them, like a doctor feels fever radiate from a door not yet opened. When the first column reached us, it halted without command. 1,000 throats held one note. The corridor's lights dimmed to hear it. They were not all poxwalkers yet. The front ranks were those we would have called healthy last month. Manufacturer hands with oil ingrained to the wrist. Hab wives with laundry scars. Scrap pickers with fingers missing and eyes quick each, bearing 3 bright pearls at throat or jaw. Behind them came the choir of the dead, and behind them the little saints, Nurglings in dozens, riding shoulders, swinging from belts, patting armor with sticky blessings. Flies orbited them like punctuation between every 20 ranks. A man or woman walked with arms spread and head cocked, listening. They wore ministorum robes altered into something looser, softer, stained a pear flesh green. Their mouths moved. They set the pace with breath alone. Choir marshals. My mind named them before I could decide not to. Bolero stepped forward. Halt in the Emperor's name. They had halted. Turn away, he said. This is a plague, not a pilgrimage. A choir marshal looked at him with pity, as tender as a mother patting a fevered child. You keep saying 2 different words for the same thing. Her lesions shone like pearls on a chain. Turn away, Bolero repeated, and the Rosarius beads clicked like teeth. Caldor leaned near my shoulder. Jarrell, if we block them, pressure will build in the corridors, then panic, then trampling, then spatter. He did not have to finish the vector chain aloud. The air's ribs pressed against my palms. The procession's hum pooled at our threshold, seeking a lower place to rest. I lifted my hand and made a small turning with the vent, then down no more than the nudge you give a child to send them through a door they'd already chosen. The choir parted down the center, not angrily, not triumphantly, merely relieved, like a river finding its old bed after a flood. They moved around our door in 2 clean streams. The poxwalkers shuffled between the living ranks as shepherded animals. The Nurglings waved at Sister Salma, who could not help waving back with 2 fingers hidden at her waist. Bolaro watched me with a look I had not yet earned from him. Not fury, not even contempt. Worse, grief. "You have opened the way," he said quietly. "I have made less blood," I answered. "Blood is not the worst of it," he whispered, and the beads bit his palm again. The processions passed. The corridor, filled with a smell like tea left too long on a hot plate. When the last rank had gone, the silence returned like a hand over a mouth. Even the flies settled to listen to it. Row 77's cogitator chimed as if answering a catechism. Observation. Self-organization consistent with ant colony behavior. Pheromonal analog in airborne glycoprotein. Choir marshals exhibit entrainment leadership with minimal deviation. Note: cadence 771 recurring. 7, Bolero said, staring at the retreating choir. Of course. The numbers were a net I could still throw without tearing. I wrote .medicae log 730, day 18 emergence of choir marshals, semi-lucid infected guiding processions. Mix of living and poxwalkers. Discipline high, aggression low. Vector control improved by allowing passage complicity versus triage. Listenings used to redirect flow. Effective. Theological, ethical implications. Severe, city-wide. Drone persists. Vox, silent. Bells toll at septimal intervals. Recommendation: non-interdiction corridors to avoid stampede spatter. Sealed still rooms every 200 meters for staff respiration. No preaching into processions. Silent hand signals only. I tried to write request orbit-side intervention. My hand wrote respite instead. I crossed it out carefully until the paper pilled. Sister Salma brought me water, cupping my fingers around the tin. Her eyes were clear as lamplight behind glass. The boy slept, humming tiny notes that braided with the drone and disappeared like minnows in a wide river. "Let me go with them," she said, barely above breath. "No, I can help," she said, and lifted the child to show me the little rose-bright lesions along his ribs that opened and closed like new mouths learning a prayer. They showed me how to carry him so he doesn't cough. They taught me the bell tone that eases the pain behind his eyes. I can keep him quiet in the stream. "You can keep him," I said, and the sentence was truer than I wanted. "If you stay." Her mouth trembled once and was still. "You can't keep the air." Jorel Bolero stepped in before I had to answer. "Sister, we serve here. We die here," she said. But she sat obedient in posture, disobedient in bone. At mid-shift, the second procession arrived, larger and slower, dragging carts. I expected corpses. They carried bread, flat loaves, burned at edge and soft in center, made from ration mash, somehow leavened with yeast that had no right to live in the sump. The smell was maddeningly good mash and sweetness and something sour that made the mouth water. A Nurgling vaulted into our ward with a loaf twice its size and dropped it at my feet like a dog with a prize. "This is mockery," Bolero said, but his stomach betrayed him audibly. Kaldor's men swallowed as one. The choir marshal smiled. "You cannot fight on fear alone." "We're not fighting," Kaldor said. "We're waiting. Same thing, different weather," she murmured. Rosavanti 7 took a specimen with a mechadendrite and cut it in perfect squares. He sniffed, analyzed, licked the blade, utterly unbothered by the way Bolaro made a sign with his whole arm. Yeast unknown. Glycoprotein binders consistent with airway serum. Microbial load elevated but non-lethal to present vectors. taste, agreeable. It feeds the song, I said. It feeds the hungry first, the choir marshal said. She looked at me the way a teacher looks at a stubborn boy who keeps showing his work even after the answer has been given. Take the tools, Medicae. I did not take the bread. Sister Salma did, and broke it with hands that had washed 1,000 bedpans without such shame. She fed the boy. He swallowed without coughing and sighed. I hated her for the relief she wore like a shawl, and I hated myself more. The procession moved on. The flies left a pattern behind them on the wall where they landed to rest. 3 circles, again and again, until it looked like a child had drawn constellations with a greasy thumb. By evening, the processions had become maps. Row 77 stood over his portable cogitator with Caldor and scrolled the hive's skeleton in sepia and lines. The choir paths drew themselves as the machine learned their harmonics arteries and veins. A circulatory system moving peace instead of blood. Peace, Bolero said, tasting the word like a stale wafer. Call it stupor, call it surrender, call it breathing without panic, Caldor answered. Father, men have killed for less. Men have killed for songs, Bel said, and somewhere in him something gave way with a sound like tired leather tearing. He went to his altar. He unpinned the little pict of the emperor and held it between both hands. For a moment I thought he would throw it, burn it, nail it to the door. He did none of those. He set it down facing the wall as if dismissing a clerk. Confessor. I said, do not confess to me, he said without turning. I am not strong enough to absolve filth, or smart enough to sort it. The wall sweated sweetness where his fingers had touched. That night I caught my hand writing without me. I had opened the log for figures counts of breaths, med-dose schedules, a ration of clean water and sexy work that still believes it matters. The pen moved. It wrote neat, tidy script, my script, with better flourishes. Request all Vox broadcast of septimal lull. Accept retuning of scrubbers to pattern 771. Instruct bells to I dropped the pen as if it had heated. The letters kept writing for 1 heartbeat, finishing the word comfort. Then the nib stuttered and spat a blot. I clapped the book shut. Jor-El's sister Salma's voice from the cot, gentle. Are you well? Yes. The lie felt like a familiar coin, warm from an old pocket. I did not open the book again. I went to the door and put both palms flat to the frame, like a penitent seeking a different god, and asked the air to lean hard right. It did. The herd outside rippled obligingly. My skull rang with bells I could not hear. Caldor drifted to the threshold and stood beside me without speaking. We watched the procession split around our door like a stream around a stone. Am I still the sort of man I was? He asked at last. Yes, I said, and then, because the coin in my pocket had cooled, no. He laughed once. That's 2 different answers for the same thing. Seems to be the hour for it. Do you think the governor still lives? Yes. Do you think he knows he does? No, he nodded, and the nod had weight we both pretended not to notice. When this ends, he said, there will be orders. Someone will demand we name the moment we stopped resisting. They will want a line to put in a report. They will draw the line where we ate bread, I said. He smiled without lips. I didn't eat. I didn't either. We did not say we wanted to. He cleared his throat. Tomorrow, we try the net again. On a bigger loop. No bells, I said. No bells, he agreed. Row 77 hummed to himself in the sanctum. content because an instrument had promised to be more itself tomorrow. Bolero lay on his side on the floor, Rosarius under his cheek like a child's toy. Sister Salma sang the boy to sleep with a belton she claimed was only breathing. The ward exhaled, the hive inhaled. The processions passed, tireless, gentle, ruinous. I pressed my brow to the frame. It was cold and clean. The 3 damp circles reappeared on my skin, where steel kissed sweat. "Grandfather," I said, without meaning to. The vent above me sighed. A wordless answer. I did not move. I did not sleep. I did not pray. I kept the corridor parted with little names, the way a clerk keeps books, balanced by moving numbers from one column to another until nothing topples. I gave my first ribbon dot. Was small, the rule that every dose be logged before it was given. I dosed a child before writing it down, then wrote it down later and did not cross the line to show the error. The book did not punish me. The air felt easier. The choir outside purred. The hive dreamed on its feet. Toward dawn, a new sound entered. The ward, not bell, not wing. A low horn, far above the sump, long and sorrowful. The kind of note a ship makes when it passes shore in fog. Kaldor lifted his head. "Orbit," he whispered. Blaro sat up. "Judgment." Row 77's eyes brightened. "Consultation." Sister Salma cradled her boy tighter and said nothing. Opened the log again and found the page blank where I had crossed out comfort. The paper was new. The fibers had unlearned the letters. I stared until my eyes watered. Then I wrote, "Request." Orbitside Council. The pen did not stop me. The horn sounded again, patient as breath, as if a giant at the edge of the world had raised a hand in greeting and asked whether we meant to come aboard. "Tomorrow," Kaldor said. "No," I said, throat raw today. He nodded, understanding that for some words, the only honest tense left is the present. The horn came again at dawn, low, patient, heavy as the tides. Everyone in the ward froze, even the patients who had been humming all night with lesions glowing like candle flame. The note carried through metal and marrow alike. It wasn't just. Heard it pressed. Lieutenant Kaldor was already at the barricade, eyes raised to the ceiling as if he could see through rust and ducts. "Orbit," he murmured again, awe in his voice. "They've come." Confessor Bolero dragged himself upright, eyes bloodshot, Rosarius hanging loose like an anchor. "Judgment," he rasped. His voice cracked on the word, halfway between terror and relief. Row 77's Vox clicked alive. Translation, Orbitside Auspex, sweep. Long wave penetration tone. Message, "We see you." The horn faded. The hive answered every procession, in every corridor swelled its humming, a counter-chorus that rose until walls shook. The ward's patients sat upright as one, lesions pulsing in luminous patterns. The boy in Sister Salma's arms clapped. Delighted, coughing green vapor, like breath made visible. The hive was singing back by midshift. Kaldor's scouts returned with news. Imperial Navy ships in high anchor. 2 at least, maybe 3. The Auspex towers in the upper spires blinked with their signal. The populace filled the streets in processions, turning their humming outward, lifting arms to the skies like pilgrims greeting angels. "They'll see." "The order," Kaldor said, almost convincing himself. "Discipline intact, streets clear, no rioting. They'll think the quarantine is holding." Bolero barked a laugh, raw and cracked. "They'll see corpses that walk in lines. They'll..." See heresy in Hymenos. He slammed his fist against the bulkhead until lesions split across his knuckles. They'll burn us. Sister Salma shook her head slowly, cradling the boy tighter. They won't burn joy, not if they see it with their own eyes. Her son coughed again, and the note of his cough aligned perfectly with the next toll of the orbit horn. Everyone in the ward went still. Even Bolero, Medicae Caldor whispered, looking at me. You've seen it more than any of us. Which truth will they hear? I could not answer, because inside me, deeper than fear or faith, something else had begun to whisper. Show them. Let them come closer. Let them listen. That night the horn fell silent. Instead came the first lights. Long beams knifed down through the hive's smog-choked air, white and holy, sweeping across spires like the gaze of a god. Wherever the beams touched, processions stopped and lifted their faces, humming louder, basking like penitents in sunlight. In the ward, even our lumen strips flickered in sympathy. The patients wept openly. Salma pressed her lips to her son's lesions as if kissing relics. Bolero collapsed against the altar, muttering, not light, not salvation, targeting solutions. His voice cracked, but his rosarius beads clicked. Steady, like a man counting the seconds before execution. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe her. I wanted, above all, to believe that Orbit could still choose mercy. Contact confirmed. Orbit-side Auspex sweeps. At least 2 vessels. Hive response. Mass alignment of processions. Hymns directed skyward. Symptoms hive-wide. Entrainment with Auspex horn. Cough tones aligning in unison. Prediction. Fleet will misinterpret signs depending on observer bias. Possible, a quarantine stability, or B, planetary scale heresy. Personal note, I no longer trust which truth I want them to see. That night, I dreamed of Orbit. I was standing in vacuum, lungs frozen, eyes bleeding, but the silence was full of wings. Navy ships hung before me like coffins of steel and prayer, their hulls etched with aquillas that shifted and wept pus. Their auger arrays pointed down at me, listening dot inside each hull. Crews knelt in neat rows, humming through burst lips, hands clasped in prayer to a god they thought was still the emperor. And something vast stood behind me. One hand on my shoulder, voice thick with love. Let them see your joy, Jurel. Show them what you've learned. If they burn you, the smoke will carry the hymn. I woke with flies crawling across my lips and did not brush them away. The horn did not sound at dawn. A new voice did. It came through every working speaker left in. Some 3 grills with rusted louvers, the ward's cracked wallplate. Even the little auxiliary vox piped into Rosavanti 7's cogitator. It arrived flat, scrubbed of warmth, the way light becomes colorless when it passes through too much glass. This is Battlefleet Calixis Auxiliary, Cruiser Mercy of Harfex, addressing all surviving authorities of Hive Arcos. By writ of Quarantine Black and under the seal of the Segmentum Commander, we assume emergency command. You will respond. The room held its breath. Even the processions out in the corridor softened their hum as if startled by new weather. Lieutenant Caldor was already at the wallplate, thumb on transmit, lesions bright on his throat. Mercy of Harfex, Ground Authority Lieutenant Caldor. 9th Arcos PDF, acting for the governor in Sump 3 Theta Ward. A beat. Paper shuffled somewhere very far away. Then recognized. Transmit infection status, force disposition, and faithful resistance index. Bolero mouthed the last phrase and looked ill. They have a number for faith now. Row 77's Vox clicked, then spoke without asking anyone permission. Addendum, Mechanicus presence, confirmed, Engansir Adept, Row 77, Municipal Stacks Advisory, noted. The fleet voice said, stand by for assessment. A different tone, closer to the mic, edged in. Ground Commander, your precept is to prepare extraction cadre of uninfected personnel 20 souls, minimum for screening aboard ship, present at Sluice 9 slipway in 8 hours. Failure to present will result in escalation to Protocol. Bolero seized the plate. This is Confessor Bolero, Ministorum, attached to Ward Theta, Sterilitus. Do you speak of Confessor? The voice said, flat as a blade. We speak of what you think we speak of. Kaldor put a hand over Bolero's and gently pushed the mic down. We copy, he said. We will assemble a cadre. The plate crackled. In addition, all public Vox channels are to be silenced. Hymnals will cease. Bells will cease. Anyone transmitting tones into atmosphere will be designated as hostile emitter and targeted for neutralization. The ward listened to itself. Listening then, the voice did something I had not expected from a mile of steel. It softened by the thickness of a breath. If containment inside one district can be demonstrated, escalation will be delayed. We require a measurable silence. A square 200 meters by 200, held free of resonant indices for 1 hour. Confirm capability. Kaldor's eyes slid to me. Row 77's mechadendrites stilled. Bolero shut his eyes on a prayer. Sister Salma held her boy as if the ward itself might tug him from her arms and lay him on the line like an offering. I put my hand to the steel doorframe and felt the room like a chest. Ribs, net, bellies rising and falling. The herd outside, purring, the vents, content. My own skull, a bowl where tones pooled. Confirmed, Kaldor said, because someone had to say it, and I had not yet found air for words. Transmit coordinates, the fleet voice said. You have 8 hours. Failure to demonstrate calm will be read as defiance. The plate clicked twice, and silence took back the room. They did not send us a map. Ross 77 made one, dragging a gloved finger across the cogitator's sepia skeleton. Kaldor chose a square of corridor and cross-vent, with no headroom for ambush and too much history for comfort. Sluice 9, where the first herd had sung as one. Bolero drew a trembling breath, a test constructed by cowards to soothe their consciences. Or, a rope, Kaldor said, steady. We can hang on or hang by it. Sister Salma touched my sleeve. Can you make the air obey you for an hour? No. I told the truth before the room could ask for a vow. But I can ask it kindly, and the stacks can help. Ross 77 angled his head, a fraction. Local net, extendable. We can drape the square if municipal draw remains within tolerance. Bells and pylons must remain quiet. If upper spires ignore, the order they won't, Bolero said, too fast. He swallowed. They will sing silently if they must. He went to his altar and turned the Emperor's picked back outward. He did not apologize. He didn't have to. We all understood the language of last chances. We prepared a miracle. Like men prepare a trolley of instruments, PDF troopers cleared the chosen run with non-kinetic persuasion, hands up, masks tight, palms out, letting processions part like water around a Kaldor stationed for squads at the square's corners. Muzzles lowered, safeties cold, orders repeated until they sounded like lullabies. Don't fire. Don't shout. Don't touch. Breathe, small. Row 77 spidered wire and copper over the vents. Filaments drooping like dew-heavy webs. He set copper plates at the four edges and tuned them until they thrummed in antiphase with the corridor's lazy purr. Server skulls drifted, trailing prayer smoke that smelled, mercifully, only of machine oil while they worked. Bolero walked the perimeter barefoot, Rosarius under his toes, lips moving no words, only breath shaped into prayer. He would not share his breath with any god who asked. Even that refusal was a kind of him. I stood in the square's mouth with both palms on the jamb. I closed my eyes. The ward's breath settled under my hands. Begin. Row 77 said. We sang without singing. The filaments drew the vents exhale into a curve I named for quiet. The plates pressed down on the hum as a father's hand presses a child's unruly shoulder. I nudged the eddies under the door, coaxing them into sleep. Kaldor's men matched their breathing. One old sergeant tapping two fingers to his chest as if relearning an oarstroke. The square smoothened. Not silence, but the kind of peace traffic makes at midnight when the city has decided no further profit can be wrung from motion. A procession reached the edge, paused and bowed. The choir marshal watched in wonder as her hum fell from her mouth, like a shawl, and lay quiet on the floor without shame. She looked at me. We didn't know you could ask the air to rest. It says yes, I said. If you say, please. She smiled, lesions bright. Politeness changes gods. Her ranks detoured with gentle hands, skirting the square as if it were a cradle. Nurglings clapped and blew kisses and did not enter, content to watch. The minutes accumulated. Row 77 called them out in Bin Arik. Kaldor echoed in words men know. Bolero kept the count with beads. 10, 20, 30, at 31. The first crack appeared. A vox somewhere up spire bled a note down the ductwork thin. Eager, the first mistake of a well-meaning priest who thought obedience meant comfort. The square shivered. Lesions brightened along 10 throats at the south corner. The hum rose to taste the new sweetness. Hold, I said. To everyone, and to the metal, and to myself. Row 77 twitched a dial. The copper sang lower, patient as gravity. Kaldor lifted a hand, and his troopers lowered their own in unconscious imitation. Bolero's jaw clenched. A vein in his temple flickered like a twisted lumen. The note faded. Silence returned like a cat to the lap it had meant to sit in all along. 40 passed the square. The processions moved like tides, guided by moon and stone. The choir marshal watched, with gloved hands clasped. She stood so still, a fly landed on her eyelid, and she did not blink. 50 above us. A horn sounded not the long sorrow of Auspex, but a short tone with clipped edges. The fleet calling to itself, the way surgeons murmur across a table. Row 77's eyes brightened by a fraction. External attention focused, measuring, good, Kaldor said, and for once there was nothing else in his voice. 50-7. The choir marshal flinched. Her head cocked as if someone had touched her hair when they should not have. She turned toward the square and took one careful step forward, as if compelled. Don't, I said, and felt the word go from my mouth to the vent like a hand closing. A door she stopped with the toe of her boot at the chalk line we had drawn on plasteel. Tears welled and balanced in her eyes, and when they fell, they traced 3 clean circles on the floor where they landed. She exhaled, and the exhale did not. Sing, please, she whispered. Please keep this. 60. Row 77 cut the plates with a soft clack. The filaments drooped. Kaldor let his hand fall. Bolero let his foot slide off a bead. The square did not roar, it breathed. The hum returned, pleased, like a choir dismissed to drink water in the courtyard. Transmit, Kaldor said, thumb, depressing the plate. Mercy of Half-X, we have held the square. Request delay of sterilitas. Request boarding for council. Request options. The fleet did not answer at once. 100,000 tons of armor is slower than a human breath. When the voice came, it had edges again. Ground, demonstration recorded, sterilitas delayed, conditions, immediate presentation of cadre at Sluice 9, submission of Engenseer and confessor for orbit-side interview, cessation of all hymnals, cooperation with Navy Medicae for decontamination trials. Non-compliance will be read as mass consent to termination. Bolero laughed once, a bark that hurt to hear. Consent, sister. Salma stepped forward. Take me, she said, astonishing herself. Take my boy. Let your Medicae see his lesions and learn their names. No, I said, too sharp. She flinched, and I hated my voice for its edge. Kaldor put a hand on my arm. They need bodies that still choose, else they'll only study corpses. Lips moved around a word he did not say. Martyrs, rows of 27s. Mechadendrites stilled in a posture that was not prayer but resembled it. I will go, he said. I am useful. The vox crackled. Ground. Confirm names. Engenseer, Ross 77. Confessor, Beladu. Amejikai. No Medicae, I said. Kaldor spoke over me. Medicae Han will remain to sustain calm. Substitute Lieutenant. Kaldor. There was a pause long enough to contain a conversation we were not invited to hear. Accepted, the fleet said. Blaro looked at Kaldor. You don't have to strong backs carry, Kaldor said, and looked pleased to have found a proverb with edges he could hold. Besides, somebody has to lie on the ship while you tell them we can breathe without singing. He turned to me. You keep them breathing. I will try. He nodded, as if I had offered certainty. He turned to Sister Salma and the boy. He put 2 fingers to his brow, a soldier's blessing only half remembered. Keep your heads under the waterline. She made the same sign back, the way some poids do when they lend a tool and expect it home. We moved like men in a story told quickly so the teller will not weep. Kaldor assembled a cadre 15 troopers who still wore their masks tightly, and looked at the square with wary love. Rose 77 gathered coils and plates as if he expected to be asked to tune a ship. Bolero put on his stole with hands that shook only once. The choir marshal walked with us as far as the first corner and then stopped. If they ask us to sing, she said, looking to me, what shall we sing? Nothing, Bolero said. Too fast. Breathing will be enough, I managed. She nodded, lesions bright. Then breathe. At Sluice 9, the procession parted without command. A navy lighter descended like an iron moth, landing talons biting rust. Its vox flared, approach one by one, masks on, hands visible. Kaldor turned. Jor-El, yes, if they ask you for a silence again, he said, give it. If they ask me for a song, he smiled without showing teeth. Give them something that keeps us alive. Bolero touched my shoulder. Do not trade what you cannot name. Row 77 patted a copper plate like a pet. Observation, the Medicae knows his limits. Hypothesis, he will exceed them. They climbed the ramp. The lighter sealed. A gust of clean, cold air spilled along the sluice ice and metal, and a ghost of incense, not yet befouled by sweetness. The processions shivered. The boy in Sister Salma's arms stirred and sighed as if hearing a new bell. The light arose, small against the hive's skin. For an instant, the white beam from orbit caught it and made a halo. Then it was gone. We walked back in a quieter procession, without hum. The choir marshal kept pace at my side. "What will they do?" she asked. "Measure," I said, "and then decide whether we are data or souls." She nodded, as if this had always been the choice. At the ward door, I set my palms to the frame. The steel was cool. The air leaned as asked. The herd outside purred. Sister Salma eased the boy onto his cot and fed him a corner of bread. He did not cough. Bolero sat at his altar and indexed his beads to an hour that is always almost over. Row 77's sanctum hummed gently in its corner. Wires, patient as webs. I opened my book. Medicae log, 7 Theta, Day 20 Fleet, contact established. Ultimatum, extraction cadre, enforce silence. Demonstrate containment. Sterilitas, delayed upon proof of calm. Silence Square held 60 minutes via combined local net plus listenings plus discipline. Processions respected perimeter unbidden. Cadre extracted. Ilitan Kaldor. Confessor Velaro. Engen Sir. Rose 27. 15 troopers screening. No children. Risks. Orbitside misinterpretation. Coercion of citywide bell. Pylon retune. Weapon test purges producing vector aerosols. Operational, maintain still rooms. Publish silent signals card. No flame, no kinetics. Reroute processions around care corridors. Personal, I can keep the air polite. I cannot make it righteous. I blotted the page. The ink dried in 3 circles where my hand had rested. The vox on the wall hissed, then cleared. A new voice knot. The fleet's clerk, older, colder, as if a mountain had learned speech. Ground authority. This is Inquisitor Vex, aboard the Mercy of Half-X. We will speak soon. Sister Salma looked up, startled. Bolero's name rose behind my teeth and did not find air. The line clicked. The ward listened to its own heat. Tomorrow, I said, but the word had lost its future and sat down in the present like a tired man on a low step. The ward woke to no horn, no hymn. Only the vox. It did not crackle, did not hiss. It opened as cleanly as a door that had always been unlocked. Ground authority, the voice said. This is Inquisitor Vex. The sound was colder than the fleet clerk's, but deeper, more deliberate, as though each syllable had been weighed against scripture before release. Even the flies settled on the rafters to hear it. Kaldor was gone. Bolero was gone. Row 77 was gone. Only I remained to answer. This is Medicae Joral Han, Ward Theta, Hive Arcos, I said. My voice seemed pitiful against his, like a cough against thunder. A pause stretched. I could almost hear the weight of eyes pressing through orbits. Lenses Medicae Han, Vex said. You have contained contagion long beyond expectation. Admirable, impossible, report. I looked around the ward. The boy lay on his cot, lesions pulsing like little hearts beneath his skin. Sister Salma hummed under her breath, soft, careful, not a hymn but something shaped like one. Bolero's altar faced outward again, the Emperor's picked staring at me like a witness I had failed. I spoke anyway. Patient stable, no riot, processions orderly, discipline intact, hive functions, altered. Vex's tone carried neither surprise nor curiosity, only permission. To damn myself further. Processions obey harmonics, I said. Choir marshals regulate. Infection does not break, order it sustains it. A scrape of quill on parchment. He was writing me down. Define infection. I closed my eyes. Lesions, hum, shared tone, a compulsion toward procession, transmission, through contact, breath, resonance, mortality minimal, transformation, total, silence. A silence so heavy the walls bowed inward. Finally, Medicae, you have 3 options. 1. Assist in sterilization. 2. Present yourself as vector for study. 3. Defiance. Sister Salma rose, clutching her son. Defiance means fire. I hissed at her to be still, but the vox carried her words upward like sparks. The Inquisitor ignored her. Ground, your discipline of silence square was noted. You can bend vectors. Explain. I put my hands on the doorframe. Steel was cool, obedient. The corridor outside breathed like a patient under sedation. I ask, I said simply, and the hive obeys. Another pause, longer, colder, then a sound like parchment tearing, though I knew it was only his breath. Medicae, you will. Demonstrate. By midshift, orders arrived in the form of a beam. Not horn, not vox. A lance of light from orbit cut through smog and painted a perfect circle on Sluice 9 Square. The same square we had held before. The circle glowed on plasteel, 10 meters across, steady as a coin resting on a palm. Step into the circle. The vox commanded. Caldor would have been here to carry it. Bolero would have raised his Rosarius and dared the beam to burn him. Rosavanti 7 would have skittered ahead with his copper plates, but they were gone. Only I remained. I stepped forward. The air thickened as my boots crossed the chalk line. My ears filled with pressure. I put my palms to the frame of the square, though no frame existed, and asked the hive to breathe small. The processions hushed. Nurglings cocked their heads. Even the lesions on the choir marshals dimmed, pearls gone cloudy. I whispered to the steel underfoot, to the pipes in the walls, to the vents above, please rest. Please hold. The hum lowered. The square stilled. For a moment, it felt like standing at the center of a still pond, while ripples rolled outward and died. The vox hissed, recorded. Then a new voice, the same but closer, as if he had leaned. To the mic, do you know what you are doing, Medicae? No, I whispered. Yes, Sister Salma said behind me. The Inquisitor breathed once into the mic, a sound like judgment sharpening itself. You are not containing disease. You are shepherding worship. The word hit me harder than any diagnosis I had ever spoken. Worshipped. My palms shook against the frame. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to say I was saving lives. I wanted to scream that order was better than slaughter. Instead, I said nothing, because silence was the only honest answer left. That night, the Inquisitor's gaze did not fade. I could feel it in the ward, an eye turned downward from orbit, brighter and colder than any lesion. The patients shifted uneasily. In their cots, the boy whimpered in dreams. Sister Salma sat with her back to the wall, staring at the ceiling as if waiting for it to split open. I opened my log and wrote with a shaking hand, Medicae log, 7th letter, day 21, contact, Inquisitor Vex, orbit side, ultimatum, assist, sterilization, present self as vector. Defy. Demonstration ordered. silent square. Repeated under Auspeck's beam. Successful. Assessment. Infection sustains order. Processions resemble worship. Personal. I am no longer certain whether I am treating disease or conducting liturgy. When I blotted the page, the ink dried into 3 rings again, and from the ducts above came a whisper, not of the fleet, not of the Inquisitor, not of any human voice at all. Shepherds always become what they lead. Would you like me to continue? Part 14, with the Inquisitor descending planetside to confront Jor-El directly, or keep him in orbit a little longer while the hive itself shifts further toward open worship. The Inquisitor did not wait. By second dawn bell, the vox crackled once more, and this time there was no clerk, no naval adjutant, only him, Medike Han, prepared to receive me. The line cut. Sister Salma clutched her son so tightly he whimpered. But even his lesions dimmed at the weight of those words. Bolero was gone, Caldor gone, Rose 77 gone. There would be no one to interpose between that gaze in orbit and us now. I stepped to the doorframe of the ward, palms pressed flat, and listened to the hive breathe. The air itself trembled, every vent vibrating with anticipation. The processions outside slowed their hum, as though a master conductor had raised his hand. Above, the sky split. A thunder of engines roared down the shaftways. Dust sifted from rusted rafters. For an instant, light brighter than the sun lanced through the hive ceiling and burned a straight wound downward. Through that wound came the Inquisitor's shuttle sleek, black, embossed with sigils that gleamed with cold fire. It settled in the square with the grace of a blade returning to its scabbard. The ramp lowered. He emerged. Inquisitor Vex was not tall, nor was he robed in grandeur. His carapace was matte, unadorned but for the seal across his chest. His face was bare, lined like cracked stone. His eyes agmetic, each iris a ring of pale silver, moved without flicker. No lesions touched him, no tremor betrayed him. He radiated nothing but judgment. The processions knelt, every lesion-dotted face pressed to plasteel, every boil pulsed, once like a candle guttering in a draught. Even the Nurglings crouched low, hissing but subdued. Only Sister Salma remained standing, her son clutched against her ribs. And I, at the ward's threshold, the Inquisitor walked with steps measured, as a pendulum. He stopped before me. Medike Han, he said. His voice was the same here as in orbit, cold, absolute, incapable of being mistaken. You have kept a city alive that should be ash. Show me why. I gestured behind me. The patients sat calmly, in their cots, humming faintly, eyes glassy but not violent. Sister Salma kissed her son's lesions and he cooed in her arms. The air was heavy but peaceful. Order, I whispered. They are not rioting. They are not killing. They obey. His silver eyes narrowed. They worship. The word landed like a knife in soft tissue. They live, I managed. For now, he stepped past me, scanning the ward. His gaze lingered on the boy. The child stared back, unafraid, humming softly in time with the hive's breath. Vex's hand hovered near his bolt pistol. Stop, Sister Salma begged. He is still mine. The Inquisitor looked at her. For the first time his voice shifted, not softer, but slower, as though he tasted something bitter. No child is his mother's once the warp lays hand upon him. The boy laughed then, a bubbling giggle that harmonized with the lesions. Glow, the flies thickened overhead. The hum deepened. Vex's hand stayed where it was. He did not draw. He turned instead to me. This is your doing. You ask the hive to breathe, and it obeys. You lead these processions. Do you deny it? I treat them, I said, but the words tasted like lies. You conduct them, he replied, and when he said it, I knew it was true. That night, the Inquisitor did not return to his shuttle. He remained in the ward, silent, watching. The processions outside knelt in perfect stillness, heads bowed toward the sump square as if it were already an altar. I opened my log. Though my hand shook so violently I could barely hold the pen. Log 7 Tharta, Day 22. Inquisitor Vex descended, observed. Hive processions knelt before him as if before judgment. Reaction, no culling yet. No orders given. Only observation. Note, he accuses me of conducting worship. I cannot refute him. Fear, his silence is heavier than fire. I blotted the page. The ink dried into 3 circles once more. Above them, I wrote without thinking, shepherds, always become what they lead, and from the shadows of the ward. Inquisitor Vex spoke aloud as though reading my thoughts. Yes, they do. The Inquisitor did not sleep. All through the night, he sat in the ward's corner, silver eyes unblinking, hands resting on his knees. The lesions on the patients pulsed softly, a rhythm like the heartbeat of the hive itself. Outside, the processions kept vigil, kneeling in the sum squares, humming low, waiting for the man who had not yet spoken judgment. By dawn, the silence became unbearable. Inquisitor, I said, my throat dry as dust, you have seen them. They are not berserk. They are not monstrous. They are changed, yes, but still ours. Still loyal. Vex turned his head, and those silver eyes cut through me. Loyal to what, Medicae Hon? To you, to the legions that sing in their throats, to the God who waits at the end of this song. Sister Salma clutched her son, tears burning her face. They are loyal to life, she said, and life belongs to the Emperor. The Inquisitor stood. His presence filled the ward like a wall. No, woman. The Emperor does not share what is his. If they breathe another's hymn, they are his no longer. The boy giggled then, a bubbling laugh that caught in his lesions and echoed like a bell. The whole ward stirred, the hum rising in answer. Flies whirled down from the rafters in a spiral that brushed Vex's armor. His hand went to his bolt. Pistol.time stopped. Every patient watched. The processions outside leaned forward as one. Sister Salma sobbed. Bolero's empty altar stared. My own breath clung in my lungs, thick and wet, and Vexy froze. His weapon remained half-drawn, trembling. For the first time, I saw doubt in the Inquisitor's stone-cut face. The boy laughed again, softer, almost sweet. The lesions glowed like tiny suns. Vex holstered his weapon. Judgment is deferred, he said, his voice low, iron cracking under weight. For now, he turned to me. Medicae Honu are a contagion as much as your patients, but you may yet serve as evidence. You will keep them breathing. You will conduct your worship of silence. And when the Emperor demands reckoning, I will decide whether to name you savior or heretic. With that, he strode from the ward, flies scattering before him like chaff before flame. The processions parted, their humming swelling until it became indistinguishable from a hymn. His shuttle took him back to orbit, leaving behind only the promise of return. The ward breathed again. Relief, terror, exhaustion. Sister Salma kissed her boy's forehead as though she had bought him another day of life with her tears. And I, Medicae Jorel Han, sat with my logbook open. my pen carving words that felt heavier than scripture. Medicae log cemented. Day 23, Inquisitor Vex observed. Judgment not passed. Hive calm intact. Ultimatum, keep them alive. Personal, I no longer know if I hope for salvation or for the hymn to never end. I closed the book with shaking hands. The lesions on my wrists throbbed in rhythm with the hive dot above us. Orbit waited. Judgment deferred. For now, if you've been following Joral's descent, you know this is only the halfway mark. Should the Inquisitor return with fire, or will he bend, becoming part of the hymn he came to end? Stay with me for the next part, and let's walk deeper into Nurgle's embrace together. Subscribe, like, and share so you don't miss the next descent into horror. The hive is only beginning to sing.